Hello. Today we will immerse ourselves in an atmosphere of tranquility and the gentle, lulling sound of words. Before we begin, please like, subscribe, and write in the comments where you're tuning in from. I'm very curious. When you're ready, dim the lights, turn on a soft background noise, and let's slowly enter the world of nighttime stories together. In a quiet and unassuming chamber, tucked away behind a heavy wooden door, a small table sits beneath a narrow window. The glass is slightly warped, so that late afternoon light pools unevenly across the rough-hewn planks. On the table lie various earthenware vessels of modest design, a short, stout pitcher with a gently curved handle, a narrow-necked bottle sealed with a simple cork, and a squat jar with a smooth lid that fits snugly. Each vessel contains an ingredient: powdered bark, dried leaves, or a few sprigs of gathered herbs that will later be combined, one by one, into the large black cauldron that rests on 3 stubby legs at the center of the room. The floor is made of flagstones worn smooth by countless footsteps. Between the stones, faint traces of moss have formed, though here indoors they remain pale and muted. Beside the cauldron stands a wooden stool, its seat slightly concave from long use, and leaning gently against its legs is a simple broom bound with twine. Further off, an hourglass filled with fine, pale sand waits patiently for its turn, its glass gently glowing in the fading light. A slender figure steps forward, dressed in muted colors that blend with the chamber's warm tones, and approaches the table. With careful fingers, the figure lifts the pitcher and pours a slow, steady trickle of amber liquid into the cauldron. The liquid settles at the bottom, and as it does, a thin wisp of steam curls upward. The figure sets the pitcher back down with a soft clink, then reaches for a small wooden scoop. Scooping a measured teaspoon of powder, the figure allows it to drift through the air before settling into the liquid, where it slowly sinks and dissolves, leaving behind faint ripples on the dark surface. Pausing, the figure steps back and picks up the broom. With even strokes, the floor around the cauldron is brushed, first left to right, then front to back, until the path between stool and table is clear. Each sweep removes the tiniest speck of dust or stray leaf fragment. This task, simple and repetitive, offers a gentle rhythm that calms the mind, as each stroke echoes softly against cold stone. When the floor is free of debris, the figure lifts the stool, sets it near the table, and settles upon it without haste. A long wooden ladle rests beside the cauldron, carved simply and sanded smooth. The figure takes up the ladle, dips it into the dark mixture, and stirs slowly in a continuous, circular motion. The motion is steady, neither hurried nor labored, a circle round and round, always returning to its starting point. With each rotation, the steam from the cauldron rises in slender spirals that drift upwards and fade before reaching the low ceiling. As the stirring continues, the figure shifts position, leaning slightly to rest one elbow on the edge of the stool. In this posture, the hands move on their own accord, guided by a practiced familiarity. Occasionally, the figure glances toward the hourglass, watching the sand slip downward grain by grain. There is no rush. Each grain falls at its own precise pace. And so too does the mixture in the cauldron transform in its own quiet manner. After a dozen or so gentle circles, the ladle is lifted and held aside. The figure reaches for the narrow-necked bottle and tilts it just enough to release a few drops of a pale green liquid. Each drop produces a soft, muted ripple and a faint hissing that punctuates the silence. A tendril of scented mist floats up, carrying the subtle aroma of earth and dew, then slowly disperses into the air. The figure then sets the bottle back in its place and picks up the hourglass. Turning it end for end, the pale sand begins anew, forming a small, steady mound in the lower bulb. The motion is unhurried, and the sand falls in tiny pinpricks of light. With the hourglass standing and the mixture settling, the figure closes its eyes for a brief moment. A breath, a pause, the gentle hush that follows a sigh. When the eyes open, they focus again on the cauldron. The stirring resumes, this time with a slightly different angle, creating gentle eddies that spiral toward the center. The vessel beneath remains silent, save for the whisper of wood against metal. Behind the ladle's rim, the mixture's surface glows faintly in the soft, amber light. Time stretches. Each circuit of the ladle, each grain of sand, each drifting wisp of steam becomes a quiet element in a greater, undisturbed flow. No sudden movements or loud sounds appear to break the rhythm. Only the steady unfolding of simple actions, one after another, invites a deep calm. Outside the chamber, a muted corridor stretches into a gentle dimness. Yet even here, the hush remains unbroken. The door, left slightly ajar, allows a faint glow from the cauldron to slip across the threshold and mingle with the soft shadows beyond. That glow flickers subtly, not in sudden bursts of brilliance, but in the smallest of pulses, slow, deliberate, and barely perceptible, like the quiet heartbeat of a resting creature. The figure sets the ladle aside and folds both hands together, letting the warmth from the cauldron linger across the fingertips. A measured breath settles in the lungs, calm and deep, before leaving just as quietly. The hourglass continues its gentle measure, but there is time yet before the last grain reaches the rounded bottom. No urgency intrudes. Instead, a gentle patience permeates every surface, every edge, every faint ring of light. A small parchment lies beneath the pitcher, its rolled edge gently lifting and lowering with the draft slipping through the open door. On its surface, faint lines describe nominal proportions. 1 measure of dew-gathered essence, 2 measures of finely ground leaf, 3 measures of distilled dusk touch. None of the ingredients carry grand titles or fantastical claims. They simply exist as everyday companions to evening stillness. Above each description, a tiny dot marks completion, and one by one more dots will join them until the list is quietly fulfilled. From a clay jar near the far corner, the figure withdraws a few slender sprigs. Each sprig is no wider than a matchstick, yet it holds a muted, earthy scent that speaks of forest floors and shaded roots. The sprigs are laid upon the table, then broken cleanly in half with soft clicks, each sound swallowed almost immediately by the surrounding silence. The halves are then lowered into the cauldron, where they drift a moment before slipping beneath the surface. A brief ripple moves outward, touches the iron edge, and drifts back toward the center until nothing stirs. The stool is turned, slowly, by half a circle, so the figure now faces the narrow window. Fading daylight paints faint patterns across the flagstones, elongated rectangles of soft gold bordered by cool gray. Dust motes hang suspended in the air, shifting only when the faintest eddy passes through the room. They sparkle here and there, small points of brightness that vanish when glanced at directly, yet reappear in peripheral vision like gentle reminders of time's quiet motion. With calm precision, the figure lifts a small corked vial, translucent and tinged with the palest hint of blue. When the cork is eased out, it leaves behind a low, velvety pop. 3 slow drops descend into the cauldron, and where each meets the surface, the liquid forms a perfect circle that widens, then vanishes. For a moment, a delicate fragrance, cool and reminiscent of distant rain, drifts through the chamber, mingling with the earlier scent of warm earth. Again, the ladle is taken up, its wooden surface darkened by years of gentle use. The motion begins, unhurried, simply guiding the ingredients in quiet circles. Around once more and then again, never forcing, only encouraging the natural rhythm to emerge. Occasionally, the ladle's edge taps the side of the cauldron, a subdued, hollow note that fades almost before it can properly be heard. That single note then echoes softly inside the memory, lingering as a suggestion rather than a sound. Off to one side, near the table leg, sits an hourglass-shaped candle holder. Its candle is unused, the wick still white, waiting for dusk's arrival. A faint anticipation surrounds it, though even the anticipation seems unhurried. It simply remains, like everything else here, abiding in its quiet place until its moment comes. Around the holder lies a modest ring of dried petals, placed perhaps for decoration, perhaps for simple habit. Their colors have faded to soft creams and browns, aligning easily with the subdued palette of the room. Along the back wall, a cloth drape hangs loosely from 2 simple hooks. The cloth is woven of plain linen, dyed a gentle gray-green that seems to shift in shade as the light gradually wanes. Very softly, the drape moves with each slight movement of air, an almost imperceptible sway, as though ocean tides of extraordinary calmness are passing through unseen. The smooth folds catch and release stray beams of light, tracing shifting lines that fade just as soon as they appear. The figure pauses once more, listening, though no new sound arises. Only the distant hush of the outside world persists. The muffled memory of wind in the branches, the soft murmur of unseen currents in the atmospheric quiet. Each sound arrives muted, as if cushioned by gentle layers of twilight. Together they form a subtle background, never fully distinct, yet always present, like the low hum beneath a familiar song. A slender wooden pestle, resting upon the parchment, is lifted next. Its surface bears faint parallel grooves where earlier ingredients were ground into finer dust. That dust now lies in a tiny ceramic bowl beside the hourglass, pale and dry. With slow deliberation, the figure pours the dust into the mixture, letting it drift down in a pale cloud that funnels gently into the waiting warmth. A soft hush follows, as if even the air chooses to still itself and accommodate another layer of calm. On the far side of the cauldron stands a small tripod, supporting a narrow flute of glass half filled with clear water. No bubbles float within. It is perfectly still, catching the last light. When the figure gently tilts the flute, the water slips out without a sound, merging seamlessly with what lies beneath. There is no sizzle, no spark, only the subtle shift of shadows upon the cauldron's rim, speaking of new reflections dancing across the surface. The hourglass nears its end, and when the last grains glide into place, the figure turns it over once again. The sand begins anew, the upper chamber emptying at an unchanging pace. Beside it, the untouched candle is finally lifted, and with a single match, its wick is offered a tiny flame. The moment the flame takes hold, it shimmers briefly, then steadies, emitting a soft glow that joins the cauldron's subdued light. Shadows along the walls soften and elongate, their edges blurring, blending seamlessly into the deeper dusk gathering just beyond the window. A slow breath fills the lungs, carrying with it the blended fragrances of green sprig, cool rain memory, and distant forest floor. The breath is held for a heartbeat, steady, patient, and then released, leaving the chest lighter, the shoulders looser. The figure's eyes rest upon the surface of the cauldron, watching faint spirals form and dissolve, as though tiny galaxies emerge, drift, and gently fade from sight within a moment. Across the flagstones, the narrow broom leans where it was left, each straw bound by cord, perfectly still yet always ready. The stool, warmed by prolonged presence, supports calm posture with quiet assurance. The parchment list, nearly complete, waits for just another dot or two, each marking a simple step concluded. All around, the quiet tapestry of place and time maintains its steady weave, threads of murmured air, of gentle flame, of drifting scent, of slow, deliberate motion, together sustaining an ever-deepening calm that settles farther and deeper into the hush of coming night. The gentle hush continues, and in that quiet, the faintest rustle can be sensed. Not the turn of a fresh page, but the slight tightening of parchment fibers as the air cools by a single subtle degree. That nearly inaudible sound becomes part of the layered stillness, joining the distant pulse of flame and the gentle weight of settled dust. Each element remains distinct, yet blends into a broader harmony, like tiny threads drawn into a single unbroken spool. In the dimness near the doorway, another figure appears, garbed in muted fabrics that once echoed brighter hues, a faint bell sewn to the corner of a cap, now resting silent and unmoving. The figure's hands are clasped loosely at the waist, fingers tracing lazy circles upon smooth cloth, though the motion is more the memory of gesture than real movement. Eyes half-lidded, the figure leans against the worn jamb where the edge of soft lamplight meets the deeper gradients of hall shadow, and there it remains without urgency or aim, part of the tranquil tableau rather than a separate presence. Slowly, the first figure lifts the ladle again, allowing a thin ribbon of mixture to trickle back into the cauldron. The liquid slips from the curved edge and lands with a patient hush, joining what has come before and what will follow after, the surface settling once more into near-perfect stillness. Only a slight sheen drifts outward, a whisper of movement so calm it feels almost imagined, before melting into uniform calm. A crutch of simple ash wood rests nearby, its grain visible where time has worn the finish thin. Though shaped for support, it now stands solely as witness, balanced upright against a low shelf bearing jars of plain sand, small bundles of linen thread, and 2 smooth stones collected from some riverbed long ago. The stones' surfaces glimmer softly as the candle's flame leans first one direction, then another, nudged by mild currents that drift through the half-open door. These currents slide across the floor in waves too slow to see, their passage marked only by the tiniest quiver in the linen drape upon the far wall. A half-filled cup of water sits on the table's outermost edge, forgotten yet perfectly poised. A single droplet clings to its rim, reflecting a miniature version of the chamber. Tiny window, faint candle, distant hourglass, like a whole quiet world sealed within a bead. Eventually, that droplet will release its hold and descend in silence, disappearing into the greater stillness of the room without altering its mood. Beyond the narrow window, twilight deepens into early night. The last tint of dusky rose fades from upper reaches of cloud, leaving only soft graphite tones against deepening cobalt sky. Yet even this shift carries no urgency. It progresses with the composed tempo of a steady breath drawn in half-sleep. And inside, the candle's glow grows subtly warmer by comparison, each flicker rounding the edges of shadow, smoothing corners, drawing the eye to gently curving surfaces and the quiet geometry of everyday shapes. At the cauldron's rim, the mixture thickens just enough to carry a muted luster. A few faint bubbles emerge, 2, then 3, only to slip into nothing as soon as they reach the surface, leaving behind no mark. The drawn ladle rests upon a small iron hook affixed to the cauldron's side, its handle angled downward so a final drop can fall. The drop hangs, pauses, releases, and then everything stills again. The rhythm once more returns to soft equilibrium. In the corridor, the silent bell figure uncrosses its arms and steps forward exactly 1 pace, perhaps to better feel the warmth radiating outward. The floor's flagstones accept the weight without echo, stone greeting cloth in a muted exchange. The figure then tilts its head, listening, not for any particular sound, but rather absorbing the room's entire hush, as one might hold a seashell simply to hear the vast, rolling quiet inside. The parchment list is now nearly complete. Only a single line remains unmarked. The figure upon the stool takes up a dull-tipped quill, dips it into a shallow dish of thin ink, and draws a single unhurried dot beside the final entry. The dot dries almost instantly, leaving a faint matte spot upon the parchment. Side by side, the series of dots forms a gentle column of tiny moons, each signifying a step not of progress toward an end, but rather of presence within a moment. Above, the ceiling beams rest in mute stillness, their surfaces mottled by years of settlement and faintly fragrant with old timber. Between them, small pockets of darker shadow linger, soft and velvety in the candlelight. From time to time, a mote of dust ascends upon an invisible current, rising briefly through that soft dark before vanishing into the quiet canopy overhead. At last, the spoon-bell figure lowers itself to sit upon the flagstones, legs folded neatly, palms resting upon knees. No chair is required. The cool stone offers quiet solace, and the nearby candle supplies gentle heat. Together, the two figures breathe, one near the cauldron, one near the door. Yet their separate breaths seem to merge into a single, almost musical sigh. Inhale, gentle pause. Exhale, gentle pause. Unhurried, consistent, calm. Inside the cauldron, unseen currents continue to turn over softly, carrying each ingredient in elongated spirals that form, stretch, and fade. The surface remains nearly unmoving, save for the subtle glimmer that hints at what stirs below. No abrupt aromas rise, only the blended accord of earlier additions. The trace of forest, the nuance of early rain, the quiet, herbaceous warmth like sun on dry leaves at the edge of dusk. A light movement catches the candle's flame, causing it to lean and stretch in a barely perceptible arc before righting itself. That small motion casts a ripple of altered light across the chamber. Shadows flow, highlights recede, yet nothing shocking emerges. Everything is simply rearranged in softer gradients, as though the room gently sighs and shifts its weight to the other side, before settling once more into balanced composure. The hourglass stands sentinel through it all. Its sand continues downward in steady, delicate threads that land with infinite gentleness. Each grain joins the growing mound, yet finds its place without disturbing those below. There is no collapse, only gradual accumulation, evenly distributed by the unchanging geometry of glass. Watching this descent invites the mind to slow, to find harmony with that patient descent. Watching, one may begin to sense the intangible space between one grain and the next, and in that space lies a quiet invitation to rest. So the room endures. Cauldron, candle, stool, broom, crutch, parchment, hourglass, quiet figures, drifting scent, muted color of linen, softened lines upon worn stone. Every element remains exactly as it needs to be, neither striving nor withholding, simply existing in gentle accord, unfolding minute by minute into a night whose silence is as generous as deep water and as soft as distant starlight, spread thin across still skies. Time moves in layered quiet, expanding outward like the calm rings that follow a single pebble dropped into a glass still pond. Nothing interrupts its measured passage. Even the faintest breath, released with care, dissolves into the steady hush before it can drift halfway toward the ceiling. The night settles deeper, yet instead of darkening the chamber, it merely softens color, turning each hue to a milder shade of itself. The candle, held in its modest stand, no longer seems merely to shine. It appears to breathe, exhaling a pale radiance that mingles with the ember-tinted glow rising gently from the cauldron. Nearby, the silent bell figure loosens a light cord at the trim of the cap, letting the fabric relax to a looser drape over one shoulder. The tiny bell remains mute, moving just enough to catch the candle's gleam along its copper rim before becoming still once more. From the floor, the figure lifts a narrow scrap of cloth and begins, with unhurried diligence, to polish the inside curve of a wooden bowl. The cloth traces the rim in slow revolutions, one full circle, a pause, another circle, each pass revealing a subdued sheen within the grain. Though the action is mundane, its repetition draws the mind toward a simple cadence, encouraging thought itself to ease into slower currents. The ladle, now resting on its hook, cools gradually. A single droplet that once clung to the bowl of the spoon has slipped away, leaving behind a faint, dark speck on the iron rim. That speck appears to lengthen, then fade as simmering heat equalizes and the surface settles into near-perfect equilibrium. From time to time, a slender filament of steam drifts up, tracing a delicate path that wavers briefly in unseen currents before it vanishes into the dim loft where beams cross like patient, unmoving guardians. The first figure on the stool adjusts posture, folding hands upon knees and allowing shoulders to drift lower by a subtle degree. Eyelids settle halfway, waiting each blink until the blinks themselves feel optional, perhaps unnecessary. In that state of restful watchfulness, the figure observes the interplay of faint light upon curved glass, smooth clay, worn leather bindings, and the small, waiting broom. Objects hold silent conversation in edges and reflections. A ribbon of shine passing from jar to bottle, a reply of muted glow returned from the hourglass, and so on, in a dialogue paced to almost imperceptible slowness. Outside the window, a soft press of wind stirs the few remaining leaves upon a distant branch. They flicker once, scarcely audible, then lie quiet again. Above them, the earliest stars emerge, dull at first, then gradually clearer, though their emergence lacks any fanfare. They simply appear, as though they had always been present, and only now chose to reveal their faint intent. A distant call of some night creature hangs in the air for a heartbeat and then fades, leaving behind a resonance that seeps into stone and wood alike. A small roll of parchment, once tightly bound, has gradually loosened at one end. The free edge curls back on itself inch by inch until the faintest sigh of movement halts it midway, creating a gentle arc upon the tabletop. On the revealed interior, faint sketches map out nothing more dramatic than the placement of shelves along a wall, the dimensions of a simple desk, and an indication of where light is best during morning hours. These lines, drawn in patient hand, hint at future tasks that require no haste, merely quiet attention on some later, equally tranquil day. Toward the center of the chamber, the cauldron breathes in low, even pulses, not of boiling or roil, but of the mild convection created by subtle warmth. Ingredients suspended within trace tiny spirals, microscopic constellations drifting in dark solution. They rise a fraction, glide inward, and settle. Tracing patterns repeated so gradually that observing one complete circuit might occupy an entire stretch of contemplation. Their dance is neither purposeful nor idle, like the softly descending sand. It is simply the movement that exists when time and patience share the same space. The candle's wick elongates in the slightest melt of wax, tipping toward the rim while still holding its flame. A tiny bead of liquefied wax dares to slip down the side but pauses, cooling just enough to keep its place halfway, reflecting the amber light in a miniature teardrop. Beside the candle, the untouched jar of finely ground dusk sap sits sealed. Its contents, a muted gray-green powder, shift imperceptibly whenever the floor receives an extra breath of step. But with both figures settled, the powder rests in perfect stillness, waiting for a need that may not arise tonight, or perhaps on any night. A light creak sounds as the stool's occupant changes position again, crossing one ankle over the other and lowering chin to chest, not in sleep, but in deeper ease. Breathing slows further. Inhalations lengthen, gathering cool air scented faintly with herb and wood smoke. Exhalations extend, releasing warmth to mingle with candle and cauldron glow. Each full cycle feels slower than the one before, yet perfectly natural, as though the body recalls a tempo established in some early morning of the world and is merely returning to it now. Both figures rest in mirrored stillness, separated by a small stretch of flagstone, yet connected by shared hush. Their presence adds no weight to the room beyond what is needed. They neither gather nor disperse energy, but simply dwell within the gentle current that flows, unseen, unspoken, from candle to cauldron, from cauldron to hourglass, from hourglass to silent bell, and then outward into the linen-veiled corridor, into the night air beyond, and ultimately into the vast, calm expanse where quiet itself finds room to linger. Thus, minutes slip onward, yet no moment crashes into the next. Instead, each one arrives as a low ripple, touches the chamber, and drifts gently away. And within that continuum, mind and breath, light and shadow, scent and stillness weave a single, uninterrupted tapestry, covering the hour like a soft, unending lullaby laid carefully upon a bed of soundless time. A whispered interval passes, unmarked by clock chime or spoken phrase, until the candle's flame shortens ever so slightly, drawing its halo just a breath nearer to the wick. The air in the chamber cools by one delicate increment, enough that the faint green tendrils of steam above the cauldron take on a more silvery cast, drifting slower, drifting higher, then dissolving into the dimness where ceiling beams linger. The shift is gentle, like a tapestry's color fading beneath moonlight. Present, undeniable, yet never abrupt. From the flagstones, a small cluster of rounded pebbles rests in a shallow wooden tray. Each stone is smooth, mottled in shades of muted cream and soft slate, gathered from some distant brook whose quiet murmurs are now remembered only in the stone's faint sheen. One by one, the bell-capped figure lifts these pebbles, rolls them between calm palms, and sets them in a neat row along the tray's edge. The touch is feather-light, but even so, a soft click echoes each time polished surface meets wood. These tiny sounds, measured and evenly spaced, resemble heartbeats slowed by deliberate ease. Within the cauldron, the liquid darkens subtly, not through sudden change, but by absorbing each minute sigh of warmth from the fireless base below. It no longer glows. Instead, it exudes a low luminescence like an ember hidden beneath deep ash. The first figure regards this shift with tranquil acceptance. No need to test or taste, merely to observe and understand that an unseen balance has drifted one step nearer completion. A parchment square, smaller than the earlier list, lies atop a closed jar containing single sprigs of dried thyme and lavender. The square bears nothing more than a circle drawn in faded ink, surrounded by faint dots like sleepy stars in a pale sky. The seated figure lifts the parchment, examines the circle, and returns it without adding a mark. The circle's quiet perfection appears sufficient. Sometimes an untouched shape can be as purposeful as any elaborated pattern. The broom, still resting against the stool leg, receives a gentle nudge. Its bristles slide across stone with a sigh scarcely louder than breath, and in that motion, a single strand of straw detaches, drifting downward until it settles in the thin seam between two flagstones. There it will remain, an unhurried occupant of the floor's geography, perhaps waiting days, perhaps years, before the next sweep gathers it away. Another inhalation fills the chamber, long, thoughtful, unforced. The scent has changed yet again. A thread of faint honey mingles with subtle moss, while lingering notes of cooling iron hover just beneath. These layers seem to settle directly into muscle and bone, coaxing shoulders to sink another fraction, the head to angle in a more restful tilt. A hush wells up that is almost tangible, as though the air were padded with soft cloth, lining each moment against even the possibility of disturbance. Outside the narrow window, clouds drift across a field of newborn stars. They travel unhurriedly, their contours illuminated by unseen moonlight that never quite penetrates the glass, but smudges the pane with pearly smears. On the windowsill, a single curled leaf, carried earlier by a wandering draft, rests motionless. Its edges have crisped, yet the pattern of veins gleams faintly, revealing a map of once rushing sap now stilled into perfect rest. The hourglass completes another cycle, grains pooling in slow symmetry. Upon its final grain's arrival, neither figure moves to turn it. The device is content to stand, both bulbs half-filled, embodying an equilibrium that mirrors the room's own silent poise. Even so, the gentle slope of sand invites reflection on countless cycles before and countless still to come. None urgent, all patient. Near the candle, a shallow clay saucer holds 3 coins so worn their markings have nearly vanished. The bell-capped figure lifts one coin and taps it lightly against the saucer's rim, once, then sets it atop the other 2. The diminutive chime that results is soft as distant wind bells, fading into the walls before echo can form. Sound, like breath and scent, merges with the chamber, leaving no sharp boundary between source and silence. Along the far wall, the linen drape shifts again, stirred by a draft too light to feel. Its weave catches candlelight just enough to reveal a faint, frayed thread traversing one fold. That thread gleams silver, winks, and vanishes as the drape eases back into stillness. A quiet reminder that nothing, not even fabric, remains wholly static, though change itself can learn the cadence of calm. Slowly, the seated figure uncurls from the stool and stands, joints flexing with muted creak no louder than turning pages. Hands reach for the ladle, but rather than stirring anew, they balance it flat across the cauldron's rim. There, wood meets iron in tidy alignment, as if marking the completion of one phase before the onset of another less tangible shift. Fingers linger on the warm handle, then withdraw, leaving it poised like a bridge between stirred past and quietly steeping present. Words remain unspoken. Their absence is deliberate, for language might jostle the delicate web of hush that is unfurled here. In silence, subtler exchanges flourish. The candle nods in tiny arcs. The cauldron exhales unseen shapes into dimness. The hourglass dreams of future inversions, and both figures breathe in synchronized cycles that echo tides measured on remote moonlit shores. Gradually, the silent bell figure lifts the polished bowl and tips it sideways so the candlelight fills its interior. A reflection forms, a miniature cauldron, a pinpoint flame, two blurred silhouettes, and ripples as the bowl is angled. It is not observed for long. After a brief moment, it is set down again, its inner glow settling into stillness. The reflection fades, yet the after-image lingers behind closed eyelids like soft ink on tissue, permeating the mind with shape and warmth without insisting on thought. A final hush settles over the room, deeper than any before, flowing outward until even the corridor seems touched by its cloak. Shadows grow rounder, light withdraws to nothing more than quiet attentiveness, and the chamber, satisfied with its gentle alchemy of time, sensation, and rest, appears prepared to cradle every breath in an unbroken cradle of night-bound calm. Beyond the quiet bowl, another slow layer of calm unfurls, as though an unseen hand were drawing gauze across every ordinary shape. No hour announces how far the night has drifted. Simply, the hush grows slightly deeper, like water settling after rain. The two figures, breathing in matched cadence, seem almost carved from dusk themselves. Yet life hums in small gestures. A fingertip adjusting the edge of parchment, an eyelid fluttering with the weight of gentle dreams that hover but do not land. A faint, velvety hum, low as distant thunder turned soft by leagues of sky, rises from the cauldron's heart. It is not a warning. It resembles the contented murmur of a seashell remembering its ocean. Within that murmur lies a story older than seasons, spoken by patient gods who require no temples, only the long, slow turning of elements. These gods have no quarrel, no demand. They cradle silence the way clouds cradle moonlight, asking nothing, holding everything. One figure takes up the wooden pestle again, yet not to grind. Instead, the rounded end glides across the tabletop in languid arcs, describing circles within circles. Each motion echoes the cosmic geometry murmured by unseen deities. The wheel of seasons, the turning of tides, the spiral that hides inside a shell or galaxy. Under that emblem of slow eternity, The grains of ground dusk sap settle deeper, conforming to the mild tremor of the wood. Upon the window's glass, a fragile bloom of moisture forms where warmer inner air meets the cool hush beyond. Tiny droplets bead together, merge, and slip downward in unsteady cadence. They leave clear paths that briefly reveal sharper views of star-scattered sky and the pale hint of a crescent moon reclining just above the roofline. Each revealed fragment of night seems to glance into the room, recognize its own stillness mirrored here, and nod in silent kinship before mist closes over the pane again. The bell at the cap's corner stirs at last, not with sound, but with the softest tremor. The seated figure, now standing, draws a breath so full it lifts the shoulders, then releases it like a sigh meant only for the floor. Fingers lift an untouched sprig of lavender from the jar, break the stem in thirds, and let the pieces drift one by one onto the cauldron's waiting surface. They land noiselessly, float, and slowly turn, releasing an aroma that slips through the chamber like a pale ribbon, weaving between warm stones and cooling metal. Somewhere in that drifting perfume, the thought of distance dissolves. The corridor outside might stretch for miles or hardly an arm's length. The sky might hang close enough to touch or reside on the far side of centuries. Measurement ceases to matter. Only rhythm remains, of sand descending, of wax surrendering heat, of breath joining breath in a soft duet. The gods of quiet things listen, content, for time itself has chosen to move in half steps, smaller than minutes, wider than dreams. Under the stool, the lone straw that fell earlier shifts imperceptibly as the stone cools. Its tiny shadow lengthens, sipping the last of the candle's broader light. In that dim edge, it appears like a stylus laid upon some blank slate, ready to inscribe stories that will never need to be told, because their silence already holds the meaning intended. Above it, the broom keeps its restful lean, bristles relaxed, spine a gentle arc made firm through use and patience tonight is the chief artisan. With it, the room reshapes whisper by whisper. Steam fades to memory. Wax cups the wick in new ivory walls. Liquid within the cauldron grows darker and clearer at once, revealing a smooth sheen like obsidian reflecting nothing but potential. The figures, too, are molded by patience. Eyelids lower again, shoulders descend another breath's width, and thoughts drift outward on currents slower than twilight. In such depths of calm, the gods who sit without altars make themselves known only as subtler quiet. The hush after a page is turned, the soft glow at the edge of extinguished flame, the coolness that gently seals the window's moisture into lucent pearls. They do not appear, they do not retreat. They hover in the interval between heartbeats, assuring each muscle that rest is not absence, but gentle continuance. Thus hour leans into hour. No barrier separates what was evening from what is night. The change happens like ink washing into water, visible, inevitable, yet unremarkable. And the chamber, carrying its small constellation of objects and breaths, drifts deeper into the silent tide, guided by unseen hands that steer without touch, without need, without haste. Somewhere within that tide, the faint glint of a single ember stirs beneath the opaque surface of the cauldron. It does not flare or crack. It merely glows like a hidden compass point, guiding nothing and no one, yet softly affirming that warmth still lingers at the center of things. Slowly, almost unnoticeably, the glow widens into a muted ring before sinking again, leaving the liquid as dark and still as moon-washed slate. Above it, the wooden ladle, balanced like a sleeping swan across the rim, rests in perfect equipoise, its handle extending into the hush like a branch grown for the sole purpose of inviting stray whispers to perch. Nearby, the candle endures its small eternity. The once ivory pool of wax has deepened to palest honey, and faint ridges mark every drift of melted edge now cooled. Each fresh intake of air feeds the wick an invisible thread, coaxing the flame to lean imperceptibly, sending a fleeting luster across the smooth backs of glass jars. That luster travels in patient procession, first across a sealed vessel of powdered bark, then along the curve of a narrow bottle whose cork bears a solitary dent, then over the shoulder of a squat jar still cradling fragments of time. Where the luminance meets the curved window pane, it fragments into shy prisms that wink once and fade, as though reluctant to trespass upon the deeper shades beyond the glass. Both figures have settled into stillness so complete that even the subdued rise and fall of breathing feels like a distant current. The bell-capped one has drawn knees to chest, clasped by loosely interlaced fingers, a position expressing neither watchfulness nor slumber, but a third, quieter option that dwells between. The other figure, who once measured powders and coaxed steam into spirals, stands at arm's length from the cauldron, palms open and downturned, fingers separated just enough that cooled air can thread between them. The pose resembles a silent benediction offered to the surface below, though the blessing itself contains no words, only an understanding that element and intention now share a single, boundaryless breath. Above their heads, heavy beams keep vigil with timeless poise. In the subdued glow, they appear less like timber and more like lengths of river worn long ago into seasoned stone, each knot a quiet fossil, each grain a trace of incremental patience. In certain angles, one might imagine shapes upon those beams, curves that hint at gentle figures reclining in the grain, perhaps watching over the room with eyes half closed, perhaps dreaming in the slow lexicon of trees. Yet to name them would prompt too much clarity. Instead, the gaze passes on, content to let suggestion remain suggestion, as soft and formless as fog. A single grain of sand escapes the lip of the upper bulb before the hourglass is fully turned. It falls alone, describing a solitary arc, landing on the smooth slope of the opposite pile, where it settles at once without disturbance. Only after that silent landing is the hourglass inverted, palms guiding the glass with the solemn grace of cupping water. The renewed descent begins, a narrow, shimmering thread slipping through the waist, calculating time not as command, but as invitation. Each grain advises the room to be exactly as calm as it already is. Sound, though nearly absent, still finds subtle avenues. The soft rasp as linen sleeve grazes wooden stool. The muted click of warm wax stiffening along the candle's edge. The faint creak where the broom handle adjusts by the smallest fraction against the stone. These hushed additions of sound do not intrude. Rather, they fold into the larger silence like punctuation in a sentence designed for dreams. And dreams, if they drift nearby, do so with the weightlessness of pale moths flickering without urgency near a garden lantern long after the gardener has retired. Somewhere behind the closed parchment list, a thought unrolls itself. It is not a plot or a plan, but something still subtler, a recognition that every object in the chamber carries its own hush, and that hush joins the hush of every other object until a third hush, larger, warmer, emerges and envelops both figures like a slow tide around two lone stones. The thought does not need words to persist. It remains suspended, as stable and transparent as a bubble captured in cooling glass. Outside, night deepens yet never hardens. Clouds wander past the rim of the crescent moon, each ghosted silhouette revealing and concealing the faint starlight in alternating pulses. When a wisp drifts clear of the pane, a pale diamond of sky appears, reflected on the cauldron's surface in dim miniature. That light slides across the dark liquid with the languid certainty of continents across ages, then fades beneath a returning wash of cloud, leaving no trace but a suggestion that the universe itself once paused to peer inside. Steam thins, candle wanes, breath slows. Each simultaneous dwindling brings no sense of end, only greater spaciousness between moments. In that widening interval, thoughts grow feather-light, drifting outward until even memory loosens its weave and allows silence to seep through its threads. The gods of muted things, of polished pebble, of dim flame, of steady timber, watch over this dissolution without decree or expectation. They simply attend, acknowledging in quiet what quiet has always known, that rest is a continent vaster than waking imagination ever charts, and that one may cross into it not by effort, but by the gentle act of remaining still while time itself performs the journey. Thus, the chamber breathes, one soft inhalation, one softer exhalation, and in that measured sigh lies an endless corridor lined with lanterns of hush, each lantern containing a single slow-burning ember poised to carry uncounted travelers from wakefulness to a shore where even dreams recline upon beds of silence, drifting on tides untroubled by wind or wave. The hush remains, unbroken and expansive, like a gentle tide that continues to rise even after the shoreline seems fully embraced. Beneath the beams, candlelight drifts in languid pulses, so slow that each flicker feels more like the echo of a remembered glow than an entirely new flare. The two figures linger exactly where silence left them, one folded near the cauldron's rim, the other resting against a shadowed wall, both softened into silhouettes by the muted shimmer that flows between liquid, wax, and air. Tiny variations breathe through the room, yet none surpass the volume of a sigh. A slender curl of steam rises from the cauldron, pauses mid-ascent, then bends, as though considering whether to continue upward or linger at shoulder height before melting invisibly into the dimness. Above, the ceiling's timbers seem to exhale a faint, woody aroma whenever candle warmth touches their grain, releasing hints of sap and earth that mingle with the whisper of cooled lavender still drifting near the floor. On the table, the once ignored scrap of parchment shifts beneath a slight current. Its curled edge straightens just enough to expose one more dot beside the inked circle, a dot no hand remembers adding. Perhaps parchment and ink conspired in the calm to complete their own quiet ritual. The newly revealed mark settles into place without celebration, simply existing as naturally as dust upon a shelf, as though dots and silence were carved from the same invisible stone. A faint rustle accompanies the bell-capped figure's slow adjustment of posture. Knees lengthen, soles meet cool stone, and palms flatten gently against the floor, fingers splayed like roots, seeking rest rather than soil. The other figure answers with a mirrored motion. Shoulders roll back, spine eases, chin tips forward, until breath feathers across the top of the cauldron's surface. That breath dimples the liquid, barely, softly, before the dimple fills and vanishes, leaving the glass-smooth darkness whole again. Somewhere near the broom, a single grain of crushed leaf tumbles from an unseen shelf, its descent so light that it hovers momentarily on a cushion of still air. When it finally touches the flagstone, it settles into a natural hollow between two worn ridges, fitting so precisely it might have been placed there by deliberate design. In the grand hush, even that smallest motion feels complete, a miniature echo of stars drifting into alignment beyond the window's misted glass. Outside, night begins the subtle pivot toward its furthest depth. The crescent moon lifts a fraction higher, its pale edge sparkling like mica in a riverbed. Clouds thin, revealing a slow sprawl of constellations barely brighter than dream-fringed thought. Their light filters through the warped pane and paints soft, trembling latticework upon wall and floor, a fabric of dim silver thread laid over existing shadows without stirring them. The hourglass continues its patient errand, sand slipping, finding home, adding modestly to the mound below. Each grain lands with a weightless hush, almost too gentle to imagine. Yet somehow, the ear catches the idea of the sound, even if the sound itself never wakes. In the mind, that idea becomes a faint tick, a heartbeat measured in particulate calm, echoing through memory far longer than any audible note could manage. Cauldron 2 embraces drift. Within its depths, the suspended lavender pieces slow their turning until they hover in soft suspension, as though time itself has thickened to cradle them. Faint heat travels outward from the iron walls in widening halos, blending seamlessly with the candle's glow. Where those halos overlap, a barely visible aura forms, neither light nor color, but a suggestion that the room is wrapped in an unseen shawl woven from warmth and breath together. Along the draped linen, the frayed silver thread catches starlight and gleams anew, tracing a gentle diagonal across two folds before slipping back into shadow. That brief flash hints at distant lightning too quiet to rumble, the way deep ocean flickers under leagues of water where thunder never reaches. Yet here, within walls shaped by calm, such gleam invites no tension, only a renewed awareness that stillness can house small sparks without breaking its tranquil spell. A quiet thought wanders through the figure's shared silence, that everything within the chamber has learned the art of resting in place, and that they too have become pupils in this practice. Bones loosen, muscles lengthen, and even the spaces between heartbeats seem to widen until pulse and pause feel indistinguishable. Words grow soft inside the mind, syllables stretching so thin they dissolve into the same hush that spins between ceiling beam and stone floor. Minutes slide by in low tides. The candle's pool deepens further, its rim turning opalescent as cooling wax builds a fragile wall that holds flame steady. Occasionally, the wick bends enough to let a bead of wax slip free. It lands among earlier drops, forming layered rings like quiet echoes of raindrops striking still water. Those rings harden swiftly, preserving each echo in pale relief. At last, even the faint murmur inside the cauldron eases into deeper quiet. The hidden ember flickers once behind the dark surface, then settles into a glow so subtle it seems imagined. Yet that understated ember remains, a single whispered promise of warmth waiting patiently beneath the hush. And the hush, vast and tender, receives the promise without need for any answer other than continued stillness, continued breath, and the slow, measured unfolding of night that offers refuge, pulse after softened pulse, to every sleeper whom gentle silence might yet embrace. The hush lingers, unfurling in subtle layers like sheer muslin drawn slowly across a hidden window. Within those layers, every object seems to breathe in patient cadence, the cooled ladle still balanced on the cauldron's rim. The broom, its bristles barely touching stone. The hourglass, half lit by a candle flame that now leans just enough to graze the glass with liquid gold. Even the worn flagstones appear to exhale, surrendering the day's quiet warmth into the slowly cooling air. Outside, a feather-thin breeze coasts along the roofline, its passage marked only by a faint shiver in the warped glass. That shiver ripples down the pane, nudging the lattice of starlight that hangs upon the chamber's walls. The ripple settles. The lattice steadies. Calm reclaims the silence as naturally as water calming after a skipped stone's last kiss. Beneath the window, the curled leaf gathered earlier shifts by a scant millimeter, tracing a fresh, almost invisible line in a film of settled dust before coming to rest once more. No further, no nearer, simply present. The figures remain part of that still tableau. One, half kneeling, lets fingertips hover a hairbreadth above the floor, feeling coolness rise like an invisible tide. The other, upright yet relaxed, rests fingertips lightly on the cauldron's rim, gathering faint warmth that lingers in the iron. Their breaths move in parallel arcs, long inhalations that fill the space without crowding it, slow exhalations that trespass upon nothing. Light within the candle's pool glimmers against a single grain of wax adrift near the wick. That grain spins lazily, circumnavigating the flame in a tiny orbit, its journey measured in uneven pulses of molten glow. Wax, once fluid, begins a graceful withdrawal into opaque form, leaving a delicately ridged shoreline around the rim of the pool. Each ridge resembles dunes under moonlight, soft, unhurried, quietly inevitable. Inside the cauldron, liquid hush deepens. A dim hint of reflected starlight hovers on the surface, tracing a faint arc that mirrors the moon's crescent high above. Beneath, lavender segments lie suspended in perfectly poised stillness, as though the dark fluid itself has learned to cradle them without stir or drift. Once every many heartbeats, the submerged ember flickers again. Brief, benign, the gentlest nod of hidden fire, assuring the room that warmth, too, has learned the language of patience. Along the distant drape, the silver thread surrenders another whisper of sheen. A pocket of faint air, coaxed through the corridor, passes across linen folds with the delicacy of a forgotten lullaby. Where fabric brushes fabric, the faintest susurration occurs, softer than feather against feather, yet present enough to remind the ear that silence is not absence, but an intricate weave of almost sounds. One figure's hand lowers, fingertips at last settling against stone. The meeting is so mild that it seems hand and floor might have always been joined and merely remembered their bond. Pulse in the wrist slows further, aligning with the careful fall of sand in the hourglass. A granular litany that carries no command, only steady reassurance. Across from that still pose, the second figure tilts head and shoulder, letting shadow swallow half a face, leaving only a dim outline that breathes with candle and cauldron in quiet synchrony. A quiet thought wanders through the figure's shared silence, that everything within the chamber has learned the art of resting in place, and that they, too, have become pupils in this practice. Bones loosen, muscles lengthen, and even the spaces between heartbeats seem to widen until pulse and pause feel indistinguishable. Words grow soft inside the mind, syllables stretching so thin they dissolve into the same hush that spins between ceiling beam and stone floor. Minutes slide by in low tides. The candle's pool deepens further, its rim turning opalescent as cooling wax builds a fragile wall that holds flame steady. Occasionally, the wick bends enough to let a bead of wax slip free. It lands among earlier drops, forming layered rings like quiet echoes of raindrops striking still water. Those rings harden swiftly, preserving each echo in pale relief. At last, even the faint murmur inside the cauldron eases into deeper quiet. The hidden ember flickers once behind the dark surface, then settles into a glow so subtle it seems imagined. Yet that understated ember remains, a single whispered promise of warmth waiting patiently beneath the hush. And the hush, vast and tender, receives the promise without need for any answer other than continued stillness, continued breath, and the slow, measured unfolding of night that offers refuge, pulse after softened pulse, to every sleeper whom gentle silence might yet embrace. The hush lingers, unfurling in subtle layers like sheer muslin drawn slowly across a hidden window. Within those layers, every object seems to breathe in patient cadence, the cooled ladle still balanced on the cauldron's rim, the broom, its bristles barely touching stone, the hourglass, half lit by a candle flame that now leans just enough to graze the glass with liquid gold. Even the worn flagstones appear to exhale, surrendering the day's quiet warmth into the slowly cooling air. Outside, a feather-thin breeze coasts along the roofline, its passage marked only by a faint shiver in the warped glass. That shiver ripples down the pane, nudging the lattice of starlight that hangs upon the chamber's walls. The ripple settles, the lattice steadies. Calm reclaims the silence as naturally as water calming after a skipped stone's last kiss. Beneath the window, the curled leaf gathered earlier shifts by a scant millimeter, tracing a fresh, almost invisible line in a film of settled dust before coming to rest once more. No further, no nearer, simply present. The figures remain part of that still tableau. One, half kneeling, lets fingertips hover a hairbreadth above the floor, feeling coolness rise like an invisible tide. The other, upright yet relaxed, rests fingertips lightly on the cauldron's rim, gathering faint warmth that lingers in the iron. Their breaths move in parallel arcs, long inhalations that fill the space without crowding it, slow exhalations that trespass upon nothing. Light within the candle's pool glimmers against a single grain of wax adrift near the wick. That grain spins lazily, circumnavigating the flame in a tiny orbit, its journey measured in uneven pulses of molten glow. Wax, once fluid, begins a graceful withdrawal into opaque form, leaving a delicately ridged shoreline around the rim of the pool. Each ridge resembles dunes under moonlight, soft, unhurried, quietly inevitable. Inside the cauldron, liquid hush deepens. A dim hint of reflected starlight hovers on the surface, tracing a faint arc that mirrors the moon's crescent high above. Beneath, lavender segments lie suspended in perfectly poised stillness, as though the dark fluid itself has learned to cradle them without stir or drift. Once every many heartbeats, the submerged ember flickers again. Brief, benign, the gentlest nod of hidden fire, assuring the room that warmth, too, has learned the language of patience. Along the distant drape, the silver thread surrenders another whisper of sheen. A pocket of faint air coaxed through the corridor, passes across linen folds with the delicacy of a forgotten lullaby. Where fabric brushes fabric, the faintest susurration occurs, softer than feather against feather, yet present enough to remind the ear that silence is not absence, but an intricate weave of almost sounds. One figure's hand lowers, fingertips at last settling against stone. The meeting is so mild that it seems hand and floor might have always been joined and merely remembered their bond. Pulse in the wrist slows further, aligning with the careful fall of sand in the hourglass. A granular litany that carries no command, only steady reassurance. Across from that still pose, the second figure tilts head and shoulder, letting shadow swallow half a face, leaving only a dim outline that breathes with candle and cauldron in quiet synchrony. An invisible tide of slumber seeps from the flagstones, flowing over folded knees and quiet shoulders, blurring the boundary between body and hush. With eyelids drawn, vision withdraws, leaving hearing to notice what sight never could. The near-silent crackle of cooling wax, the single grain of dust shifting on stone, the gentle hum of breathless exhalation. Outside, the crescent moon slips beyond the window, replaced by a solitary star. Its pale light brushes the cauldron's rim with an ellipse so slender it might vanish with a blink. Yet blinking has grown slow, each closing a longer descent, each opening a shallower rise, until lids choose to remain at rest. Within the liquid, lavender fragments fade from sight. The final ember sighs into amber memory, leaving the fluid dark as unpolished onyx, unbroken save for a ripple born of a breath too delicate to trace. The ripple widens, thins, and disappears. Afterward, nothing moves above or below. The candle's flame dwindles to a quiet bead, bows, and guides the last sliver of light toward polished pebbles in their tray. It pauses on a quartz vein that seems to glow from within, then fades. Wax exhausts, wick sighs, and darkness settles like velvet across the room, soft, warm, without weight. Yet darkness is not absence. It is a deeper hush, a wider breath. In it, the room lingers, afloat upon the silent tide that has risen since candle first touched wick. Breath continues, regular, slow, and pulse finds a pace still gentler, until moments stretch like soft fabric drawn between careful hands. With no light to mark their passage, seconds drift apart, dissolving into a tranquil night that admits no thought of beginning or end. So the chamber abides. Cauldron cool, hourglass stilled, parchment curled, broom resting, stones dreaming, figures surrendered to a slumber older than stars. Outside, moon and cloud keep silent choreography, but inside, quiet claims its deepest color, an unspoken lullaby extending into endless dark, where wakefulness dissolves like smoke beneath forgotten rafters, leaving only peace, immeasurable and whole. Above, the beams exude a faint scent of aged resin, adding one last strand to the fabric of hush. That resin mingles with hints of lavender and the soft mineral trace left by the dying ember, producing an aroma so delicate it seems closer to memory than to breath. Each inhalation collects those traces, folds them inward, and releases them gentler still, as though exhalation itself were a lullaby returned to the room. Even the walls appear to breathe, planks expanding a hair's breadth, then yielding, as though wood itself is drifting towards sleep. In that subtle motion, every board, stone, and vessel settles into perfect alignment, and the hush, patient and endless, deepens one more shade, ready to carry all remaining thoughts into the soundless, weightless drift beyond night. A velvet hush enfolds the chamber even more completely, steady as a shoreline beneath an unmoving tide. Darkness rests without weight, spreading into every hollow. The curve of the broom's handle, the turned lip of a jar, the minute recess in stone where a single grain of dust now lies. Though the candle has surrendered its glow, a faint warmth lingers in the air, hovering just above the cooled wax terraces, reverberating like the aftertone of a distant bell long silenced. The two figures dwell within that warmth, their slow, even breaths knitting a barely audible thread between them, a shared rhythm soft as wind sliding through tall grass at night. Beyond the shuttered window, starlight dilates into the deepest well of night, casting a glow so fine it barely kisses the glass. A thin film of dew fogs the pane, each bead a tiny prism that refracts the faintest glimmer of celestial fire. Occasionally, clouds drift across the heavens, broad, low sails of shadow that mute what little light reaches the earth. Yet their passage is unhurried, neither eclipsing nor revealing in haste. In their wake, darkness seems to deepen, yet the chamber remains unchanged, as though it had long ago settled on a single unbroken tempo. Inside, the cooled cauldron radiates a gentler presence now. Not heat, yet not cold, but a tempered equilibrium that neither invites touch nor repels it. The lavender fragments, sunk beyond sight, have become a quiet thought, housed within the liquid, which itself has stilled into a seamless, mirror-dark pool. Only when a distant breeze slips under the door does the surface quiver with a suggestion of ripple, one soft, concentric tremor that vanishes before it completes a circle. The hourglass, motionless since its last grain fell, stands like a silent guardian. Grains piled below form a miniature dune, each particle in stately repose. Even without motion, the vessel seems to pulse with the memory of steady descent, as though time itself has paused to sleep beside the two figures. One figure, still kneeling, lets the tips of 3 fingers trace the smooth edge of a polished pebble resting in its tray, but without shifting the stone. Contact is featherlight, a silent reassurance that touch itself can be quieter than thought. The other figure leans ever so slightly forward, allowing a curtain of hair, or perhaps a fold of cloth, to brush the brim of the cauldron. The almost sound that results is softer than petals glancing against one another in a darkened garden. From the rafters comes a whisper of settling timber, a slow, patient sigh of wood long accustomed to holding the weight of evenings just like this one. The sigh trembles downward in a near inaudible cascade, meeting the stone floor and traveling outward like a ripple of understanding. It drifts through the sleeping grain of the table, slips over cooling wax, and slips finally into the hush between heartbeats, adding its subtle signature to the room's ongoing quiet. Somewhere deeper in the night, a solitary insect takes up its faint, measured area, threading a single note through the outdoor darkness. Though muffled by walls and window and layers of still air, that note finds entry as a suggestion rather than a sound, an almost vibration that settles into the chamber's fabric without altering its weave. The gods of hushed spaces, who accept all gentle offerings, seem to receive that note and tuck it into the silence as one might set a small seed into warm, dark soil, leaving it to dream its own slow dream. Slowly, perhaps after the passing of a dozen such almost moments, the scent of lavender retreats still farther, replaced by a hint of damp stone and faint resin. The new aroma floats like a veil across the senses, encouraging eyelids to weigh down, encouraging limbs to release their final tension. Breath grows longer, deeper, until inhalation and exhalation are nearly indistinguishable, each merging into the next in a continuous loop. The room, sensing that seamless rhythm, eases still more. Even memory loosens its tidy folding, thoughts sprawling like shadows under slow moonlight, until recollection itself begins to drowse. In that threshold between wakefulness and sleep, time seems to unfurl sideways. Moments widen to embrace silence as roomy as dusk itself. Hours condense into the faint pulse beneath skin. Neither figure marks the change, for marking would require thought, and thought has surrendered its final spear points of alertness. Instead, awareness drifts outward, diffusing like diluted ink in calm water, tinting the edges of dark with soft impression. All that remains is presence, quiet, spacious, untroubled. Outside, the solitary star at the zenith brightens just enough to paint a ghostly line across the cauldron's dark surface, one fragile, luminous thread that flickers, fades, and returns, each glimmer slower than the last. That thread, delicate as spun glass, seems to weave connections between sleeper and sky, between distant constellations and the parchment dots curled upon the table. In its pale shimmer hides the gentle murmur of gods who dwell beyond noise and myth alike, whose only doctrine is rest. Eventually, even that faint star line dims. Clouds gather again, though no eye within the chamber opens to greet them. Darkness grows complete, and within its embrace the hush achieves its fullest bloom. No breeze stirs, no wax drips, no wood sighs. Breath alone persists, deep and even, as sure as an ocean's lull on a windless night. And in that boundless hush, larger than fear, wider than longing, the chamber, its contents, and the two quiet souls nestled within drift at last into the fathomless cradle of sleep, where silence is both blanket and lullaby, and night keeps watch with soft, unwavering patience. Reality loosens one more quiet thread, allowing consciousness to drift sideways into a realm just beyond naming. Here, the hush feels vast enough to receive every gentle exhalation, yet intimate enough to cradle each faint beat beneath rib and skin. The chamber, swathed in velvety dark, no longer resembles a room so much as an endless cove of calm. Its beams indistinct cliffs, its flagstones a slow shoreline where time's smallest ripples ebb and pause before dissolving altogether. Along that shoreline, the cooled cauldron glimmers faintly, as though it has gathered the breath of distant stars into a single subdued sheen. The lacquer-black surface looks deeper now, stretching inward rather than outward, inviting stray fragments of thought to slip below and settle among lavender shadows. One such fragment, a memory of muted laughter perhaps, or the afterglow of some forgotten dusk, drifts toward the cauldron's brink, touches the liquid mirror, and sinks without fuss, leaving not even a tremor behind. Behind the figures, the linen drape releases a final sigh of folded fiber. Its frayed silver thread relaxes entirely, curling against cloth in a soft spiral that catches no light, yet seems to glow with the idea of glow. Beneath that thread, the corridor beyond the doorway becomes less a hall than a tunnel of stilled wind. Each unseen contour lined with silence so thick it muffles even the possibility of footfall. Darkness there feels plush, almost fragrant, carrying a whisper of cool earth mixed with a memory of pine long since distilled into resinous calm. Breath continues in slow tandem, Inhalations rise like tides hushed beneath new moon. Exhalations retreat like receding glassy waves, leaving no foam, no mark. Between those twin movements, a pause blooms, tiny, weightless, restorative. It is within that pause that thoughts, too heavy to ascend awake, finally lift, buoyed by the chamber's still air. They drift upward, turning weightless like down feathers, until they find rest along unseen rafters, where timber welcomes them as politely as it welcomes dust. A distant sparrow, settling deeper into night's embrace, utters a half-formed chirr outside, then subsides. The note filters through stone and wood, arriving inside as little more than an implied vibration, a gentle ripple upon the quiescent air. It drifts across the dormant broom, glides over the parchment's curled edge, and alights atop the polished pebbles, which seem to recognize kinship in the sparrow's hush. Each pebble, once weathered in riverbed currents, now experiences a different current, one of dark and quiet, and accepts it with unspoken grace. Wax, long cooled, cracks almost imperceptibly. The slender sound is neither sharp nor startling. Rather, it resembles the faint click of a second hand in a clock that has decided moving forward is unnecessary. The fissure running through hardened wax remembers molten flow, but feels no need to lament its stilled state. Everything within the room exists in similar accord, aware of change, content in rest, unconcerned with return. Somewhere high above cloud line, the first hint of dawn turns the horizon 2 shades lighter than black. Yet the color shift is so subtle it fails to reach the chamber, whose walls remain cloaked in deep velvet. Even so, an invisible whisper of pre-sunrise hush threads through roof beam and ceiling board, arriving as a fragile coolness that tickles skin bare of thought. It settles upon the 2 figures like a downy quilt newly laid atop an already slumbering pair, deepening repose without altering its rhythm. Within the cauldron, a single bubble, no larger than a pearl, forms and lifts, pausing just beneath the surface. It holds for a small eternity, perhaps the span of 3 slow breaths, then releases in silence, dimpling the liquid mirror into widening rings of shadow silver. Those rings travel outward until they meet iron walls and melt, carrying whatever quiet dream they held back into the darkness below. No other bubbles follow. The cauldron contents settle once more, as though the dream itself has been told and is now content to rest undisturbed. The hourglass reflects a thumbprint of starlight on its upper bulb, despite having no grains left to fall. The glass remembers flow like skin remembers sun warmth, but the memory remains dormant, restful. Should a hand eventually turn it, time will recommence its granular descent. But for now, time appears to lean on elbows at the threshold of dawn, dozing in sympathetic calm. Beyond the window, a breeze stirs dew into filaments that traverse the pane like delicate runes, spelling nothing yet suggesting continuity. Each droplet elongates under its own slight heft, then detaches in slow-motion descents, meeting stone sill with sound softer than sleep itself. Their gathered moisture forms a miniature pool that mirrors a wedge of starlight still visible between drifting clouds, as though the sky has sent a token of its own quiet down into the room. Gradually, the fragrance in the air shifts from lavender's lingering whisper to the barest hint of cool cedar and morningstone. It is not enough to wake. It is merely enough to guide the breath along new, slower paths, curling through lungs like smoke that forgot to carry heat. Inhale, cedar, stone, hush. Exhale, dark, calm, hush. The pattern repeats until breath and hush feel interchangeable. Two names for the same steady river. Wood sighs again overhead. A deeper, slower exhale than before, settling beams into fractions of fractions more reposeful than moments ago. That sigh drifts downward, brushing the bell at the cap's corner, coaxing one mute shimmer of vibration that cannot be heard, only sensed. The bell, content, settles. The sigh continues to floor, joins with cooled wax, lavender shadow, dew droplet, and breath, weaving everything into one vast, seamless tapestry of stillness. And so, while the world beyond the chamber edges invisibly toward dawn, inside remains a harbor of unbroken, soundless night, an inner continent of slumber where time neither arrives nor departs, but drifts like color in deepest shadow, tenderly formless, endlessly calm. Across an interval too quiet to mark, the hush deepens again, gathering into layers so fine they seem woven from nothing but the spaces between heartbeats. A cool drift of pre-dawn air settles along the flagstones, softening every edge, turning each surface, wood, iron, glass, to velvet under invisible fingers. The two figures rest where deeper dark has sculpted gentle silhouettes of them. One a curved rise against the cauldron's shadow, the other half reclined beside the table, hair, or perhaps cloth, spilling across the floor like stray ink in water. Outside, the first pale breath of morning touches the highest clouds, giving them a hue that is not yet color, only a suggestion of light to come. That suggestion glances off the window's dew-fogged pane, where droplets tremble on the verge of release. One droplet, round as a seed pearl, loses its grip and slides downward. As it descends, it draws a thin, gleaming trail through the mist, a calligrapher's stroke that fades an instant after it forms. At the sill, the droplet pauses, gathers itself, and disappears without sound into the stone. Inside, wax has cooled so thoroughly that the candle seems carved from alabaster. A faint hairline fracture winds through its length, a memory of molten days. Yet even that slender mark feels settled, content, devoid of urgency. Beneath the fracture, the wick lies in a gentle arch, a dark filament surrounded by pale walls that no longer hold warmth. Where flame once danced, a small, perfect hollow remains, cradling a single mote of soot that drifts free only when a breeze too slight to name passes through the room. That breeze issues from the corridor beyond the linen drape. It moves like a thought only half remembered, in at the hem, up through soft folds, then out across the chamber's interior. Where it travels, tiny shifts occur. A grain of sand on the hourglass mound topples, sliding an infinitesimal distance to rest again. The frayed silver thread at the drape's edge lifts, turns, and falls. A lone strand of hair or thread atop the table fans outward before resettling. Each motion finishes before the mind can fully notice, leaving behind the impression of movement rather than the record of it. Along the tabletop, the curled parchment relaxes by a breath. The inked circle and its constellation of dots ease back toward flatness, as though accepting the weightless press of dawn. Beneath that parchment, the wooden grain shows faint ripples where years of use have softened sharpness into gentle undulations. Those undulations catch the dim half-light seeping through the window and return it as muted glints, brief and subdued, like distant lanterns glimpsed across water. In the cauldron, the dark liquid receives the same half-light and turns it inward, absorbing it until a faint glow hovers just beneath the surface. No clear reflection forms. Instead, the light diffuses, becoming a soft halo that seems to drift closer, then farther, in time with the steady rise and fall of resting breath. Lavender fragments remain hidden below, yet their presence lingers as the faintest note in the air. Not scent exactly, more the silent memory of scent, hovering where fragrance once breathed and now only calm remains. A single pebble in its tray shifts minutely, nudged by nothing more than the building hush. The polished stone turns, exposing a vein of pale quartz that catches the shy dawn and holds it like a captured sigh. Around that gleam, the remaining pebbles repose in perfect quiet, each one a miniature moon carved by slow rivers into patient stillness. Together, they form an understated constellation echoing the inked dots on parchment, answering written calm with silent stone. Above, ceiling beams maintain their steady watch. A tiny knot at one beam's underside secretes a last amber bead of resin. The bead gathers weight, quivers, and then stills, clinging where it formed. Even gravity seems reluctant to disturb such peace, choosing instead to let the droplet decide its own pace. In that decision, the room feels larger, as though time itself has widened to accommodate any interval chosen by the smallest motion. In response, one figure's shoulders settle a fraction deeper, the gentle arc of spine easing toward perfect rest. The other figure's hand, which lay near the polished pebbles, relaxes fully, fingers uncurling until palm and stone share warmth so faint it feels imagined. No dreams break surface. If they flow, they do so beneath awareness, in currents too tranquil to trace. Outside, somewhere unseen, a bird tests the dawn with a single drowsy trill. The note travels no farther than need dictates. It rises, spreads, dissolves, leaving behind a silence even richer than before, as though the sound itself had buffered the quiet rather than broken it. In the chamber, the trill manifests only as a soft vibration in the cooling wax, a tremor too gentle for eye or ear, detectable only by the resonance of stillness deepening still further. Light gathers one more degree. It settles upon the hourglass, illuminating the fine dust that coats its surface. For an instant, the grains caught in glass appear to float, suspended anew, as if dawn itself were preparing to breathe them upward. Yet the grains remain. The glass stays silent, and time accepts another moment of pause. All around, the hush has ripened into something almost tangible, a nectar of calm suspended in air. To disturb it seems unthinkable, to sustain it, effortless. And so breath continues, pulse continues, light continues, each in its own unhurried way, while night leans gently aside, allowing the first slender tendrils of morning to enter without rippling the grand, unbroken sea of rest. Softly, almost imperceptibly, the world outside peers a touch farther over the horizon, ushering in the palest shimmer of pre-dawn rose. That shimmer drifts through thin clouds and finds the window's worn glass, where it lingers, hesitant, like a shy visitor unsure whether to knock. Inside, the chamber receives the new tint with the same quiet patience it granted every shade of night. Nothing stirs, nothing rushes, everything simply adapts, accepting the faint blush as another layer of calm. The cool drift of air along the flagstones now carries a delicate hush of rose-scented diffused light, settling between broom bristle and wax ridge, between cauldron rim and stone seam. Each object glows by the smallest fraction, as though morning's first breath were composed not of color, but of memory. An echo of some long-ago dawn replayed at the gentlest volume imaginable. The linen drape, touched by that faint warmth, sheds a last haze of midnight and adopts the palest whisper of silver pink, its frayed thread gleaming like a strand of dawn itself, caught and kept as a token. In the cauldron, the liquid mirror brightens by a sigh, no more. The halo beneath its surface shifts from indistinct gray to the slightest blush of early bloom, then rests there, content with change so modest it barely registers as change at all. Lavender fragments remain concealed, but their unseen shapes now echo the soft flush, as though each petal sliver were reflecting dawn from within a private dream. One figure draws an especially deep breath, slow tide in, slow tide out, and the shoulders ease a final measured span toward repose. A loose fold of cloth rides that breath, rising gently, falling gently, then lying still. The other figure tilts its head in minuscule response, chin descending half a grain of sand, aligning posture yet more perfectly with the room's steady rhythm. Between them, the hush thickens, yet feels weightless, like a down quilt hovering just above skin, warm without heaviness, present without demand. Beyond the window, a second bird joins the first, their calls subdued, half-formed, woven with more silence than sound. Each note lingers in the corridor of still air outside, then dissolves before it can echo, as though the world itself has muffled any impulse toward brightness. The chamber absorbs those gentle cadences without altering its own tempo. If anything, the soft churs only deepen the calm, like threads sewn through already restful cloth to ensure its seams remain secure. The hourglass, now softly haloed by dawn's glow, shows a new facet of quiet. Grains of dust on its surface gleam rose gold, turning glass curves into faint constellations that rise and fade with each small tilt of light. Time waits inside, equal halves balanced, yet the vessel appears neither idle nor expectant. It simply is, a silent deity of measured moments, at peace with pause. And in that poised glass, the gods of gentle things dwell content. Guardians of lull, custodians of drift, bestowing blessing without sound or sign. In response, one figure's shoulders settle a fraction deeper, the gentle arc of spine easing toward perfect rest. The other figure's hand, which lay near the polished pebbles, relaxes fully, fingers uncurling until palm and stone share warmth so faint it feels imagined. No dreams break surface. If they flow, they do so beneath awareness, in currents too tranquil to trace. Outside, somewhere unseen, a bird tests the dawn with a single drowsy trill. The note travels no farther than need dictates. It rises, spreads, dissolves, leaving behind a silence even richer than before, as though the sound itself had buffered the quiet rather than broken it. In the chamber, the trill manifests only as a soft vibration in the cooling wax, a tremor too gentle for eye or ear, detectable only by the resonance of stillness deepening still further. Light gathers one more degree. It settles upon the hourglass, illuminating the fine dust that coats its surface. For an instant, the grains caught in glass appear to float, suspended anew, as if dawn itself were preparing to breathe them upward. Yet the grains remain. The glass stays silent, and time accepts another moment of pause. All around, the hush has ripened into something almost tangible, a nectar of calm suspended in air. To disturb it seems unthinkable, to sustain it, effortless. And so breath continues, pulse continues, light continues, each in its own unhurried way, while night leans gently aside, allowing the first slender tendrils of morning to enter without rippling the grand, unbroken sea of rest. Softly, almost imperceptibly, the world outside peers a touch farther over the horizon, ushering in the palest shimmer of pre-dawn rose. That shimmer drifts through thin clouds and finds the window's worn glass, where it lingers, hesitant, like a shy visitor unsure whether to knock. Inside, the chamber receives the new tint with the same quiet patience it granted every shade of night. Nothing stirs, nothing rushes, everything simply adapts, accepting the faint blush as another layer of calm. The cool drift of air along the flagstones now carries a delicate hush of rose-scented diffused light, settling between broom bristle and wax ridge, between cauldron rim and stone seam. Each object glows by the smallest fraction, as though morning's first breath were composed not of color, but of memory. An echo of some long-ago dawn replayed at the gentlest volume imaginable. The linen drape, touched by that faint warmth, sheds a last haze of midnight and adopts the palest whisper of silver pink, its frayed thread gleaming like a strand of dawn itself, caught and kept as a token. In the cauldron, the liquid mirror brightens by a sigh, no more. The halo beneath its surface shifts from indistinct gray to the slightest blush of early bloom, then rests there, content with change so modest it barely registers as change at all. Lavender fragments remain concealed, but their unseen shapes now echo the soft flush, as though each petal sliver were reflecting dawn from within a private dream. One figure draws an especially deep breath, slow tide in, slow tide out, and the shoulders ease a final measured span toward repose. A loose fold of cloth rides that breath, rising gently, falling gently, then lying still. The other figure tilts its head in minuscule response, chin descending half a grain of sand, aligning posture yet more perfectly with the room's steady rhythm. Between them, the hush thickens, yet feels weightless, like a down quilt hovering just above skin, warm without heaviness, present without demand. Beyond the window, a second bird joins the first, their calls subdued, half-formed, woven with more silence than sound. Each note lingers in the corridor of still air outside, then dissolves before it can echo, as though the world itself has muffled any impulse toward brightness. The chamber absorbs those gentle cadences without altering its own tempo. If anything, the soft churs only deepen the calm, like threads sewn through already restful cloth to ensure its seams remain secure. The hourglass, now softly haloed by dawn's glow, shows a new facet of quiet. Grains of dust on its surface gleam rose gold, turning glass curves into faint constellations that rise and fade with each small tilt of light. Time waits inside, equal halves balanced, yet the vessel appears neither idle nor expectant. It simply is, a silent deity of measured moments, at peace with pause. And in that poised glass, the gods of gentle things dwell content. Guardians of lull, custodians of drift, bestowing blessing without sound or sign. Wax-framed shadows gather beside the candle's extinguished wick, pooling into muted silhouettes that resemble distant foothills kissed by earliest sun. Those hill shadows do not lengthen or leap. They remain steadfast as half-remembered landscapes in the mind's quiet hinterland, their contours soft, uninsistent, patient. Nearby, the polished pebble with its quartz vein welcomes dawn across its curved surface. The vein lights briefly, then dims as though breathing in the hush, exhaling calm. Far above, timber beams accept the new hue, each grain revealing faint coral lines hidden through night. In one beam, a tiny crystal of sap has hardened. Dawn's light passes through it and scatters, casting faint prisms that wander across ceiling and wall like dream fragments seeking a place to settle. These prisms linger for heartbeats, then drift away, leaving only the memory of pastel specters sliding through shadow. Breath, light, hush, all merge into a remarkably soft Concord. What small warmth dawn brings tucks itself into the cool stone and tempered iron, blending until neither warmth nor coolness can be named. Only balance, only stillness. And in that equilibrium, thought itself releases final tether, gliding out over the cauldron's quiet surface, floating beyond broom and beam, beyond birdsong and dew bead, beyond window and paling sky, into a spacious hush where notions dissolve like mist at sunrise. The gods of patient dawn, gentle custodians of beginnings too calm to notice, smile within the silence. Their presence is no brighter than before, only newly tinted by the fresh palette of day. They drift among cooling wax, around silent ladle, across the sleeping parchment's ink dots, stroking each with a reassurance that waking can wait. The time will resume only when calm has set its final stitch. Outside, the faintest edge of sun at last presses upon the far horizon, bleeding rose into gold, though the beam is still too shy to reach the chamber. That daybreak light pauses, as if out of courtesy, allowing those within a few remaining breaths wrapped in velvet hush. In those breaths, pulse beats once, twice, thrice, each slower than the last, matching not the march of clocks, but the idle drift of clouds yet unlit by direct sun. And so the chamber, the cauldron, the quiet figures, and every silent artifact linger at the delicate threshold. Night scarcely ended, day hardly begun, peace held perfectly between. In that interval, vast and gentle, the hush remains sovereign, soft, unhurried, immense, ready to carry minds still deeper, should they wish, into the soundless sea where dawn itself is but another shade of endless rest. A hush of palest gold begins to unfurl along the highest corners of the chamber, so slender that at first it seems no more than a rumor of radiance. It lingers where ceiling meets wall, seeping grain by grain into the timber, warming resinous knots until they glow like tiny lanterns held deep within the wood. Yet even this first promise of daylight obeys the solemn rhythm that has governed every shadowed breath of the night. It advances without haste, withholds brilliance, and instead pours a diluted warmth that feels more like memory than illumination. The cauldron receives this warmth the way a still pond accepts light rain, without ripple, without sound, only by growing subtly brighter in its depths. A blush of muted amber forms just beneath the surface, blossoming in slow motion and dissolving again before it can take shape. With each cycle, the liquid seems to breathe, drawing quiet dawn in, letting spent night drift away. The unseen lavender fragments respond by releasing a final wisp of fragrance, faint as the idea of a flower pressed between forgotten pages. The scent rises, curls once, and falls back into repose. Nearby, the polished pebble with its slender quartz vein awakens beneath the diffused gold. The vein kindles like a single thread of morning woven through stone, then dims to a gentle glow that appears content to wait for fuller light. Around it, companion stones shift imperceptibly, aligning in a new, unhurried geometry that echoes unseen constellations fading in the sky outside. Together, they form a quiet map to nowhere in particular, inviting no journey, celebrating only the simple act of remaining. From beyond the window, a third bird ventures one tentative note, subdued, unornamented, a syllable of promise rather than proclamation. The sound drifts inward as a soft vibration rather than a tune, settling upon the cooled wax, and trembling through the hourglass frame. For a heartbeat, the grains within seem to shimmer, as though considering whether to flow again. But dawn's counsel is gentle, and the sand chooses stillness over motion, honoring the long pause ordained by the gods of measured calm. A fold of cloth at one figure's shoulder catches the newborn light, revealing a faint embroidery of pale thread previously hidden in darkness. The pattern, no more than a looping vine with stylized leaves, appears to sway, though the cloth itself remains immobile. Perhaps the embroidery remembers some distant breeze in a sunlit garden, and now, when touched by dawn's hesitant glow, it dreams briefly of afternoon. Then stillness returns, and the vine settles back into quiet thread. The broom, half visible in slanted light, acquires an aura of soft bronze along its bristles. Each straw stands apart, yet joins the whole, like a small choir paused between verses. No sweep will follow. The bristles rest not from fatigue, but from a serenity so thorough that action no longer seems required. Close by, the parchment's inked circle and dots absorb a rosier hue. They resemble planets in slow eclipse, yet the eclipse moves at the pace of thought just before sleep, gliding so gradually that no interval separates beginning from end. Higher still, the rafters release another sigh of timber. This one is gentler than any before, less a creak than a languid settling, as though the beams have found their perfect angle for greeting light. Dust, suspended in the air, ascends on the faintest thermal drift, each mote catching dawn like a miniature lantern lifting toward shadowed peaks. For an instant, the dust becomes a slow, glowing snowfall that reverses the story of gravity. Then the warmth subsides by a fraction, and the motes settle again, owning no memory of flight. Along the corridor outside, the darkness thins but does not retreat. Instead, it lightens from deep indigo to cool slate, preserving quiet while admitting possibility. The linen drape stirs at its hem, touched by a breeze mild enough that it feels woven of the same hush as the room. That breeze slips under the fabric, gathers notes of resin, lavender echo, and faint rose, then drifts back out to greet the hall. In its wake, the silver thread gleams one brief, triumphant shimmer, an unspoken salutation to dawn, before merging once more with muted shadow. And still the gods of gentle beginnings refrain from fanfare. They move invisibly between cauldron and candle, between breath and heartbeat, anointing each with a tenderness smaller than a sigh. Where their invisible footfalls pass, wax stays cool, sand stays calm, wood stays at rest. They invite day to arrive on tiptoe, to hover at the threshold until every atom of night's peace has been heard, cherished, and laid carefully upon the shelves of memory. Thus, with tranquil patience, the chamber welcomes the slow dilation of morning. Light deepens from palest gold to pale honey, but never yet to bright flame. Shadow yields by degrees so slight, they are measured only in softness, never in shade. Breath aligns with the widening glow, expanding a shade fuller, releasing a shade longer, but keeping its cadence bound to the silent music, guiding every unmoving thing. And in that orchestration of steady dawn, a promise unfolds, not of awakening, not yet, but of rest carried seamlessly into daylight, of quiet that learns to wear morning's colors without surrendering its hush. The hush neither tightens nor unwinds. It simply receives the slow widening of honey-colored light, like a listening shell gathering distant breakers. Even the dust in the air seems to hesitate, as though uncertain whether drifting now would constitute a kind of intrusion. Over the table, the soft glow thickens into a muted arch, rounding every edge, turning corners to gentle curves. The parchment accepts this brightness with quiet dignity. Its inked marks deepen from coal to warm sepia, while the curling edge settles flat, as if to present its silent astronomy more clearly to dawn's gaze. Inside the cauldron, the amber bloom steadies, no longer pulsing, but held in perfect suspension, a finger's width beneath the surface. For an instant, liquid and light seem to match each other's breath, both so calm they could be mistaken for still images painted long ago on silk. Then the glow folds itself inward, subsiding into the placid depths and leaving behind a faint crescent reflection skimming the rim, an echo of a moon now paling into morning. A single strand of hair drifts free from the nearer figure's shoulder, sliding across fabric and coming to rest against the cool stone. The motion is so slow, it resembles the turning of a shadow rather than a tangible thread. When the strand finally settles, it bisects a thin streak of golden light pooling on the floor, creating a delicate division between one quiet plane and another. Nothing else stirs. Even the chest of drawers beneath the window, its iron pulls glinting with newborn radiance, stands in absolute acquiescence, as though drawers and handles alike have emptied themselves of purpose until summoned by some future, equally calm necessity. Beyond the pane, the sky dilates from watered rose to pale apricot. The first glimpse of the sun itself is still hidden behind a gentle rise, but its promise suffuses the air with a subdued warmth that has not yet reached temperature. That warmth slips through microscopic imperfections in the glass, glides across the sill, and mingles with the cooler breath lingering in the chamber. Together they produce a quiet equilibrium, neither chill nor sunlit heat, only the soft awareness that both are possible. The broom receives this mingled air along its straw tips. A faint shimmer appears where the bristles angle outward, each straw crowned with the smallest bead of dew drawn from night's retreating breath. Those beads capture slivers of nascent light, forming a constellation so tiny it could rest upon a fingertip. Were one to lean close enough, the constellation might reveal shifting rainbows within the droplets. Yet no one leans close, and so the colors remain secret, living and ending in the same silent instant. Across the chamber, the candle, though dark and cool, acquires a new role. It becomes a slender column of softly tinted glass. Dawn's hue seeps through wax, turning creamy alabaster into translucent peach, while the extinguished wick assumes a copper glimmer at its very tip. The fracture line winding down the candle's length now appears less a dividing fault than a gentle river course, charting a patient journey from vanished flame to sleeping wool of wax. On the tabletop, shadows of old drips overlap like gathered petals, their edges blurring beneath the pastel shine. A quiet intake of breath swells beneath fabric. It lingers longer at its height than previous breaths, as though lungs have discovered a pocket of extra space hidden somewhere inside the ribs. The exhale that follows eases out so gradually that the air seems to evaporate rather than flow. On its passage, it carries the faintest whisper of cedar and cooling iron, notes so delicate they register only once they have flown, like after-images upon scent's own memory. The hourglass, haloed now by richer gold, frames a single floating mote at the neck, One infinitesimal grain that rises, hovers, and sinks without touching either cone of sand. The grain's hesitant drift suggests a thought half-formed, pausing at the cusp of articulation before sliding back into wordless rest. When it finally settles upon the mound below, no trace remains to show it ever wavered. The tiny dune receives it with perfect composure, and the glass returns to absolute clarity. Light continues its creeping pilgrimage. It surges a finger farther across the floor, climbs the leg of the cauldron, and finds the ladle balanced upon the rim. Metal kissed by dawn glows with a muted sheen, unveiling faint hammer marks long hidden in shadow. Those marks read like a sculptor's quiet signature, commemorating patient labor undertaken who knows how many seasons ago. Beneath them, the ladle's bowl rests in midair, capturing nothing, needing nothing, simply abiding where it was placed, spanning the cool, breath-warm divide between vessel and space. A hush of birdsong gathers outside, still distant, still drowsy, but gaining dimension. Notes overlap, yet never crowd, each voice leaving generous room for the others, weaving an unhurried tapestry that drapes across the sill without spilling inside. Their music feels as if it has taken instruction from the chamber itself. Speak softly, leave silence intact, adorn rather than disturb. Timber beams accept fuller brightness now. Grain swirls emerge like topographic lines on a map of restful hills. Knots reveal glistening cores of resin lit to amber jewels. One of those jewels yields at last to gravity. The bead detaches, travels the slowest arc imaginable, and lands upon a knot below with a sound too soft for ears, yet just loud enough for silence to notice and fold neatly into itself, as though collecting a jewel in velvet. And so the room, kissed by first light yet still faithful to night's measured breathing, composes a new equanimity. Objects long attuned to darkness discover they can hold radiance without forfeiting calm. Breath continues, pulse continues, dawn continues, all entering a gentler octave of the same unbroken hymn. Day does not demand awakening. It offers instead another shade in which to rest, an early morning hush more luminous than midnight's, yet every bit as deep. Light keeps its patient advance, creeping as softly as the notion of morning in a half-remembered dream. It climbs the cauldron's rounded side, pauses where iron curves inward, and sends a thin blade of brightness through the oval gap between rim and ladle. That blade touches the liquid surface but does not fracture it. Instead, the ray appears to dissolve inside the calm, absorbed like a whispered secret that sinks without a splash. For a breathless instant, the whole room seems to lean toward that narrow gleam, yet nothing breaks silence. No ripple, no sigh. Only an acknowledgement too subtle to name. The two resting forms accept daylight as gently as they accepted dusk. Shoulders soften under the mellow glow. Fingers grow slack where they rest atop folded cloth or cool stone. In the diffused light, their outlines blur, losing the last sharpness that belonged to night. They have become shapes of repose, quiet hills beneath a dawning sky, neither waking nor wholly gone to dreams, suspended in an easy middle distance where time drifts rather than marches. A faint breeze arrives, bearing the mild scent of dew-bright grass from somewhere just beyond the window. It parts the linen drape a finger width, lingers, then withdraws, leaving the fabric trembling by a single thread's breadth. In its brief passage, the breeze braids new softness into the air, tempering every lingering trace of stone-cool hush with a suggestion of meadow and wide, unhurried skies. Once it fades, the room closes gently around the vacancy, sealing the calm as seamlessly as water settling after a pebble's kiss. On the table, the hourglass glass gleams more boldly now, its curves collecting thin bands of gold. A single mote of dust, caught in the low sunshaft, becomes a pinprick star suspended between those gleams. It turns slowly, reflecting spark after minute spark, until the light shifts and the star blinks out, absorbed back into ordinary dust. Nothing celebrates the moment of its vanishing. No crescendo, no hush departing, because everything already stands at the quietest register available. A register rich enough to hold both spark and absence without strain. Wax along the candle's fluted sides begins to soften almost imperceptibly at the touch of gentle warmth. It does not melt. Instead, its surface grows satin smooth, like river stones after a kiss of rain. Beneath, the hollow where flame once lived lightens from peach to opal, filling with a muted glow that seems to rise from within rather than reflect from without. That glow lends the extinguished wick a faint halo, as though even rest can carry the memory of light without yearning for ignition. Birdsong gathers a notch brighter outside, yet remains measured, each note distinct but never pressing. One call drapes itself over another, weaving a loose fabric of sound that hangs just beyond the threshold. Decorative, not urgent. Through the partially open drape, these notes spill in slender threads, twining with timber's faint resin scent and the waning echo of lavender. Together they form a fragrant sound, an unseen tapestry sliding through the chamber and settling in corners where coolness lingers. The broom, touched now by deeper sunlight, reveals tiny variances among its straws. Some palest straw blonde, some shading to muted amber, each tipped with a droplet grown clearer as warmth seeps in. Those droplets, once luminous pinpoints, dissolve one by one, sinking back into bristle or drifting free as mist too fine to track. No straw bends, no bead crashes. The broom merely sheds its night-garnered jewels with effortless grace, as though releasing them into the morning is part of its quiet task. An unnoticed drawer within the chest gives a microscopic creak as wood expands. The sound is so small, it exists mostly in the imagination, like the rustle of silk behind a closed door. Yet that hint of motion carries reassurance. The chamber lives, even in stillness. Boards breathe, wax murmurs its softened language, pebbles flex with hidden warmth, glass bends infinitesimally around remembered sands. Life, stripped of hurry, demonstrates itself in size smaller than thought. Outside, sunlight finally crowns the hidden rise, sending one true ray across the window. It lands not as a blaze, but as a luminous ribbon, sliding across sill and stone toward the cauldron. Where gold meets iron, a pale shimmer trembles, then steadies, turning the vessel's shadowed curve into a gently glowing arc. Under that arc, the liquid brightens one quiet shade, revealing, for the span of a heartbeat, a deep amber heart at its center before dimming once more into tranquil brown. The glimpse is enough. The room has tasted daylight and found it mild. Now the figures lie bathed in gentle warmth, breath slowing to the pace of summer clouds. No boundary marks the moment night ends and day begins. The two portions of time overlap like colors blending on wet paper, indistinct, harmonious, inevitable. It might be minutes before thoughts rise, hours before limbs recall motion, but none of that matters within this mellow bloom. The hush has simply learned a new palette. exchanging indigo for honey without forfeiting its depth. Around them, dawn settles into the foundation stones and rafters, promising that when waking finally arrives, it will do so softly, like a tide that lifts rather than crashes. For now, calm reigns absolute. The shared heartbeat of room and sleepers, the shimmer of sun across cooling wax, the soundless hush above hidden lavender. Daylight grows, but it grows the way silence grows, wide, patient, endlessly gentle, carving room for stillness even in the brightest hour to come. Sunlight continues its unhurried drift, flowing over the floorboards like a shallow, lucid stream. It washes across the stilled ladle, lays a gentle brightness on the rounded curve of metal, and spills quietly into the hollow of the cauldron below. The liquid inside responds with the faintest shimmer, one delicate glint that trembles for the span of a soft pulse before settling back into its mirrored calm. Nothing rushes, nothing clamors. Every particle of light appears to understand the silent etiquette of the room, moving only as far as peace allows. The linen drape, now trimmed with golden edge, stirs once more. This time the breeze that enters carries a hushed warmth, touched faintly by distant meadow and a hint of sun-dried hay. It coasts over the cooling wax, finds the faint fracture line, and lingers at the lip of the extinguished pool. The slightest ripple, no more than a sigh in liquid form, passes across the wax's satin surface, then vanishes, leaving the hollow unchanged save for a new, softer sheen. Each small alteration seems designed to reassure rather than awaken, to deepen repose rather than dissolve it. Above, the ceiling beams warm by slow degrees. Sap amber becomes honey amber. Knots brighten from quiet bronze to mellow gold. One beam releases a second crystal drop that travels the same languid arc as its predecessor. When it lands upon the knot below, two resin beads sit side by side like twin moons laid upon dark grain. They hold sunlight inside themselves, glowing faintly even where shadow grazes their curved flanks. In the hush, this tiny conjunction feels momentous, an alliance whispered into wood and light alike. On the table, the hourglass glass takes on a richer luster. The dust upon its surface no longer shimmers. It glows in subdued agreement with the brightened room, like powder sparingly dusted upon a parchment map to highlight hidden contours. Inside, the sand remains unmoving, yet the mound's surface now catches a gilded glow that travels slowly as the sun's angle shifts. Each grain becomes a microcosm of dawn, a point of potential sunrise nested within the broader dawn surrounding it. Birdsong outside swells another measured degree, weaving mellow trills through the lattice of warming air. The notes slip under the door, ricochet softly between stone and timber, and fade into the upper reaches of shadow. Every tone arrives rounded, never sharp. Even jubilation takes the form of an unraised voice, content to communicate joy without urgency. One bird alights upon the exterior sill for a moment, small claws clinking so lightly they produce barely a hush of contact. Then wings lift, feathers sweep, and the bird is gone, leaving only a faint swirl of sunlit dust behind the pane. The cauldron's surface, kissed by steady warmth, now reveals a quiet mosaic of agate-like tones, bruised plum near the rim, deep russet beneath, and at the core, a subdued ember of ochre. These hues remain bound by stillness, yet they invite the eye to wander their subtle variations, like strolling a path of shaded gardens without ever lifting a foot. Deep below, the lavender fragments have released the last of their stories into the air, They now lie as pale ghosts of petals, weightless memories drifting in liquid twilight. A small creak whispers from the stool legs where wood meets flagstone. The sound offers reassurance that structure still lives, flexing tiny sinews in response to sunlight's gentle coaxing. Once the creak subsides, the stool retakes its posture, unchanged yet somehow more deeply settled, as though it has shifted from night-long meditation to day-long reflection. The figure seated there, shoulders softened, head bowed, accepts this minute change, breathing a fraction deeper as posture relaxes another invisible step toward perfect ease. Against the far wall, the broom's shadow grows shorter, its bristles painting a dark, tidy fan across the warming floor. Between those shadow bristles, a single ray lodges, a spear of brightness so narrow, it seems drawn with a press of deliberate brush. That spear quivers once as the air moves, then steadies, forming a slim bridge between the realm of light and the dominion of shade. Crossing this bridge, a solitary dust mote drifts, carrying with it a tiny fleck of candle scent. On reaching the shaded half, the mote pauses, hovering in equilibrium until gravity's soft persuasion convinces it to descend. It lands without ceremony on the fold of cloth near one figure's elbow, a landing gentle enough that cloth and dust become, for a moment, indistinguishable. Outside, somewhere beyond sight, leaves rustle in a cautious breeze, soft applause for dawn's unfolding performance. Their murmur seeps into the chamber not as sound, but as a sensation of movement, a reminder that beyond stillness, there exists an easy rhythm guiding branches, grasses, distant waters. Yet that external rhythm does not disrupt the internal hush. Instead, it harmonizes, aligning outer world and inner room in a music too slow to measure by beat or bar. And so sunlight continues, sliding higher, brightening floorboards, setting gentle fire in the resin beads, coaxing the last beads of dew from broom tip and drape edge. Nothing hurries toward the waking hour. Instead, day reveals itself in discrete increments, offering steady warmth in place of sudden blaze, patient clarity in place of startling glare. The sleepers remain enfolded by calm, their breaths a shared tide that ebbs and flows beneath the new brightness without stirring the deeper waters of dream. Light builds, but serenity builds with it, ensuring that when awareness finally surfaces, if it chooses to surface, it will ride a wave so smooth that waking feels no different from dreaming, and morning itself will seem simply another delicate shade in the vast, unbroken spectrum of quiet. The hush, now tinged with soft warmth, expands to meet the cresting day, and every object welcomes the widened glow without forfeiting its quiet tenure. Sunlit motes drift in idle eddies, threading gold through air that remains cool near the floor and pleasantly mild near the beams. A sweet, faint breath of heather slides in from the outer fields, layering its promise beneath the lingering trace of lavender, so that each inhalation carries a gentle prelude to summer. The figures lie motionless, shaded eyelids trembling only when the light within the room increases by the most delicate degree. A step beyond the window, sparrows rearrange themselves along ivy-tangled stone, fluffing feathers in measured intervals before resuming their low-voiced exchange. Never strident, always aware of silence's broad dominion. Their wings rustle with the dry softness of turning pages, adding a subtle living chord to the chamber's steady hum. Across the tabletop, the parchment surface brightens until the inked constellation of dots appears embossed rather than written. each mark holding a dot of light at its center. The circle at the constellation's heart seems to breathe, margins trembling with a barely visible halo as sunlight glances across the grain. Close beside, the dormant pestle, no longer cool, merely tepid, rests in its ceramic bowl like a quiet sentinel guarding reveries that require no words, no watch. Resin gems on the timber beam merge their glows, forming a shared droplet that clings in perfect equilibrium before releasing. The tiny sphere descends in dignified silence, landing on the tabletop with such delicate poise that wax droplets and dust motes absorb the impact without fuss. The bead's amber core captures a sliver of bright reflection, nesting it like a miniature sunrise forever suspended inside a droplet of honey. Wooden stool, which has held its occupant through the gradual flow from night to dawn, exhales a second soft creak, an almost greeting offered to the widening day. Its legs shift a fraction upon the flagstones, spreading weight with the ease of a sleeper turning beneath quilts. Felt pads, thin from years of gentle use, whisper against stone and come to rest anew, confirming the stool's resolved embrace of sunlight. The cauldron now bears a luminous collar where warm rays strike the upper rim, casting a faint ring upon the liquid still pooled within. In that ring, the hues deepen, ochre fading toward bronze, bronze dissolving into sunlit chestnut, until they settle into a gentle gradient that suggests soft flame hidden far below. Yet no heat rises. Only the idea of warmth rests there, like a memory held just long enough to comfort before passing back into quiet. On the chest of drawers, a faint dust line glitters as sunlight grazes its varnished flank. Each fleck seems to stand at attention, then drift into oblivion as air stirs from some distant motion outside, a door opening perhaps, or a leaf falling. The gleam lasts as long as the beam remains angled at that precise height, then slips away, allowing the surface to resume its satin dusk of wood grain. Outside, the leaves begin a gentle round of applause in the warming breeze, still tempered, still buoyed by noonday distant light. Their hush and flutter combine with birdsong to weave an aural tapestry delicate as lace. Threaded through it comes the far-off drone of a solitary bee, its path curving past the window in a line so mellow that the sound seems spun of drowsy silk. The room receives that thread, tucks it into place, and lets it fade, preserving the integrity of restful calm. Meanwhile, the broom's bristles release the final dew beads, each droplet evaporating as a shimmer rather than a liquid fall. Where a bead vanishes, a pinpoint spark flashes and is gone, like the blink of a noon star unseen by waking eyes. Beneath the broom's shadow, the sunlight narrows to a clean edge, leaving the rest of the bristles draped in a soothe of shade. A quiet reminder that brightness and coolness may share the floor without contention. The hourglass begins to reveal shallow striations etched by time, faint rings around the neck where hands have turned it, delicate scuffs near the base where it once tapped a tray. In dawn's bloom, those marks resemble tiny shorelines tracing the contours of pale crystal seas. They speak of measure and patience, yet today they serve merely as decoration, quiet hieroglyphs carved by unhurried passage, offering no urgency to recommence their cycle. From beyond, a shift in breeze conveys a moist freshness, a breath of river or maybe distant wellspring. It drifts through the partially open drape and slips across the faces of the two resting forms. The faint chill prompts no stirring, Instead, it cools foreheads and eyelids, sealing slumber more deeply, as though ensuring dreams remain moored to their tranquil harbor. A muted ray strikes the ladle's bowl once more, this time catching the inner curve and sending a ribbon of gold across the cauldron's interior. That ribbon quivers, refracts, then splits into two slender arcs that trace half a sunrise upon the liquid dark. Though brief, their journey leaves a soft afterglow coaxed into the iron walls, warm, comforting, spouse to silence. At last, sunlight scales the final timber beam, brightening rafters until each knot and swirl is etched in clear relief. Even so, full day refrains from entering with grand ceremony. Instead, it pauses, as though bowing respect to the chamber's established hush. Outside, sparrows fall silent for a breath-long moment, allowing their lullaby to settle into air now warmed enough to cradle it. Within, the hush persists, crystalline, layered, profound. Light glows but does not dazzle. Warmth spreads but never presses. Scent drifts but never saturates. Breath continues, serene, untroubled, and the long, slow tide of repose endures against the gentle shore of morning. Should eyes open now, they would find the world waiting in perfect stillness, a tapestry of muted gold threads, ready to turn pages of day only when the dreamer wishes, never sooner, never with a single ripple to disturb the vast, enduring sea of calm. One more breath of morning light glides over the flagstones, thickening to a mellow amber that pools in shallow depressions and climbs the low walls in patient strokes. It paints the broom's handle in muted gold, traces the fine wax ridges at the candle's base, and gathers in small, quiet puddles beneath the dangling resin gems before rolling onward in slow, translucent waves. Where those waves meet the cauldron's curved silhouette, they break without sound, diffusing into a warm penumbra that lingers just above the liquid surface. Within that soft halo, the subtle gradient of inner hues, plum, russet, chestnut, settles into a single gentle tone reminiscent of well-worn copper, burnished smooth by years of kindly dawns. A nearby sparrow drops from the ivy-draped sill, brushing its wings against rough stone with a whisper too tender to startle even a dream. In its wake, a single weather-tattered feather drifts through the open gap in the window, seesaws once in still air, and comes to rest on the edge of the parchment map of dots and circle. The feather's quill aligns with an inked line along the paper grain, so that for a moment it appears the chart has grown a delicate needle, pointing nowhere in particular, yet perfectly content to remain. Dust motes, newly stirred by the feather's arrival, drift in elegant spirals, slow galaxies spinning within slanting columns of light. Each mote catches brightness for a heartbeat, then turns and releases it, passing the glow to another particle, as though engaging in a silent trade of tiny lanterns. Their dance is unrushed, unconcerned with destination. They revolve upon unseen currents that rise, sink, and vanish like ripples in air just warm enough to think of afternoon. The linen drape sighs again, this time settling into a long, effortless fold that smooths a wrinkle near its midpoint. The frayed silver filament along its hem relaxes further, as if grateful that daylight has come not with fanfare, but with a kindness equal to midnight's hush. At that exact instant, the corridor beyond brightens from dove gray to pale sand, yet holds its silence so thoroughly that the change feels like memory rather than motion. Overhead, beams emit a subtle warmth that seeps downward, mixing with the gentler air circling the cauldron. Where these currents meet, the faintest whisper of convection spirals upward, too slight to disturb a resting breath, yet strong enough to bump a solitary dust filament across the corner of the hourglass. The filament glides along glass, tracing an invisible arc before slipping away to join the broader drift, leaving behind a whisper of friction so soft it lingers only as an idea of sound. One sleeper's fingers twitch, not in wakefulness, but in deeper comfort, as though fingertips have discovered a perfect compromise between cool stone and sun-washed warmth. The faint movement nudges a polished pebble, setting it into an almost inaudible roll that carries it half a finger's width closer to the cauldron. When the pebble stops, its quartz vein reflects a brighter fleck of light than before, mirroring the droplet that still hovers in resin on the beam above. A distant breeze slants through the window's gap and brings with it the delicate scent of sun-warmed grass, shadow-cooled earth, and the crisp tang of water trickling somewhere beyond view. These aromas weave themselves into the room's aromatic tapestry, laying strands of living day beneath the dimmer threads of night's herbs and timber's resin. The blend settles gently upon skin and cloth, deepening each sleeper's inhalation, yet never nudging breath beyond its calm cadence. At the candle's hollow, softened wax accepts the new warmth by deepening its satin sheen until it seems to pulse faintly with quiet luminescence. The extinguished wick, now shining dull copper, leans imperceptibly as cooled wax softens underneath. Its angle changes by a distance too small to see without long, intent watching, yet the room recognizes the shift. Silence adjusts around it, absorbing the micro gesture as though it were a note in a score already familiar. Outside, leaves hush and hush again, parting to allow a broader swath of light that slides through the window and pools beneath the stool. The stool's shadow compresses, its outline sharpening along stone seams until it resembles a precise silhouette sketched by a careful hand. Within that outline, faint motes continue their spiral dance, their luminous choreography rendered visible for just a breath before brightness rolls on. Meanwhile, the liquid in the cauldron acknowledges fuller sunlight by revealing a translucent veil at its surface, like the skin that forms atop cooling tea. The veil quivers, tightens, then relaxes, breaking soundlessly into thin, overlapping rings that glide outward to the iron walls and vanish. No new motion follows. Equilibrium returns at once, leaving behind only the recollection of movement, a ghost ripple resting on memory's still pond. The room, now thoroughly bathed in mid-morning calm, holds its peace without strain. Light has broadened, warmth has settled, and every quiet element, from feather tip to resin drop, from pebble vein to silent wick, occupies its place in the expansive hush. Even time seems to loosen its threads further, acknowledging that hours can stretch like soft cloth, offering space enough for slumber to linger unhurried, and for waking, when it comes, to rise on the gentlest of tides, rather than the clang of clocks. As the morning matures, the chamber absorbs the ripening light with the same quiet thrift it once granted to candle glow. Sunbeams glide over the rafters in slow, widening arcs, coaxing fresh glimmers from long, dormant resin pockets and raising the air's warmth by the gentlest breath. Where those beams descend, they braid around one another, forming broad ribbons that pool upon the flagstones like silken scarves abandoned by an invisible wanderer. Each ribbon draws a faint draft upward. In that draft, dust galaxies tilt and retilt, never quite repeating the same slow choreography. The broom's handle warms by one more subtle degree, enough that its wood releases a hint of sun-steeped straw, further sweetening the barely moving air. Beneath the bristles, shadows sharpen into slender spines, yet even their new precision cannot disturb the hush. They remain as mute calligraphy brushed upon pale stone, still in meaning even as they change in form. Near them, the pebble that drifted earlier rests aglow, its quartz seam blazing softly like a tiny vein of afternoon fire banked within cool stone. On the parchment, the stray feather shifts as another breeze enters. This one broader, dyed with faint perfume of honeysuckle and distant tilled earth. The quill rocks left, then right, arranging itself so its veins lie perfectly parallel with the often traced grain lines on the table. That small adjustment seems to finish some invisible sentence begun by dawn. Afterward, both map and feather appear utterly settled, as though they have belonged together for many seasons. The hourglass glass captures a stronger gleam, and for a long moment the inverted upper bulb becomes a miniature sun caught in crystal. Within, the fine dust on the inner walls glows rose gold, painting a horizon where no grain has moved for hours. Outside the glass, the lone dust filament returns, sliding once more along the curve, slower, lower, until it reaches the base and comes to rest upon the silent dune. There it merges with the patient grains, losing individual identity in collective stillness. A faint hum filters through the window, bees discovering a patch of clover, wings thrumming in easy concert. Their music, soft yet sonorous, brushes the room like a low-strung harp, each chord fading before it can wake the sleepers. It mingles with the cool iron note still lingering near the cauldron, weaving a brief harmony that reverberates against timber and wax before dissolving into silence anew. The cauldron's veil reforms, thinner now, almost luminous. Sunlight feathered by the ladle's edge paints a lacy network across that surface film, revealing microcurrents so slow they resemble frozen lace drifting under dark glass. Eventually, the film flexes, parts, and seals again, erasing every trace of its transient geometry while leaving behind the deep copper warmth that continues to glow from within. Outside, a cloud passes across the morning sun, dimming brightness by half. The chamber adapts at once. Beams hush their sheen, resin droplets fade from jewel to gentle amber, and dust motes shift from bright gold to muted topaz. In that momentary dimming, shadows soften, re-rounding every edge and smoothing each previously sharp line. The transition lasts no more than a measured breath. When the cloud moves on, light returns, yet the hush has grown even richer, as though the brief shade distilled an extra layer of calm. One sleeper's chest rises more fully, exhaling a sigh scarcely louder than skin-brushing linen. The breath carries the mingled fragrance of resin, honeysuckle, and the last pale whisper of lavender. It hovers for a heartbeat, finds the open window, and escapes into the sunlit courtyard, leaving the room unaltered, unburdened. Fingers loosen, palms settling so completely that the nearby dust mote decides to lift again, caught by a new, nearly imperceptible current rising from warm stone. The candle's softened hollow deepens, reflecting sunlight along its curved interior like a shallow bowl of opal water. A glimmer trembles at the base where wax and wick meet, magnifying the copper tint at the wick's tip until it appears as a hidden ember under white ash. But no flame stirs. Heat alone paints the illusion before the light shifts, leaving the hollow cool and serene once more. Through the open pane, the murmur of leaves thickens, suggesting a slower breeze turning the pages of the entire midday sky. Somewhere a larger bird, perhaps a dove, utters a low, resonant coo. The note drifts through the quiet like a pebble settling into deep water, sending rings of softer silence outward. Those rings touch broom, stone, wax, and flesh alike, encouraging every cell, every fiber, to rest yet deeper, as though repose itself is the day's rightful work. Sunlight gradually begins its descent from high rafters toward lower beams, signaling the long, unhurried approach of noon. But even this hint of passing time arrives without push or pull. The room simply tilts its glow, allows shadows to lengthen by the smallest measure, and holds the line of calm unbroken. Nothing here needs to announce progress. The story of light is written in sighs, in micro shifts of warmth and color, in the way a single dust mote spirals once more, slower each turn, before settling on the parchment beside the feather needle, now pointing not north, not south, but toward the vast interior sea where silence and time drift side by side, unmeasured, endlessly at peace.